interruption of supply of food goods from GB to Northern Ireland. Why has the government now reneged on a promise which it supported in opposition, and what will be the trigger for this imposition if it's needed?
Well, the consultation on UK-wide labelling led the industry to say this will impose huge cost on us and therefore cost on consumers, raising the price of goods. The purpose is to ensure that goods are not delisted in Northern Ireland. That is why we are going to take the power to ensure that if there is any evidence that that is happening, then the labelling requirements that were set out in Safeguarding the Union can be applied, including on individual products on a sectoral basis.
Just a second, come back to Josh Newbury. He's just going to ask his question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Businesses in my constituency of Cannock Chase tell me they're facing increased red tape and costs when importing from or exporting to Northern Ireland. So could the Secretary of State confirm that he is committed to unfettered access for goods moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain?
I certainly can confirm that, and it indeed is set out in legislation in the UK Internal Market Act.
Mr.
Speaker.
Minister.
I congratulate my honourable friend on her new role as the leader of the SDLP, and I thank her for raising this really important issue. 7 women and girls have been killed violently in Northern Ireland this year alone. This is devastating. I've discussed the importance of action on violence against women and girls with the First and the Deputy First Minister, and I welcome the Northern Ireland Executive making this a priority in their programme for government and the new strategic framework.
Claire Hannah.
Thank you, Minister. Mary Ward in my constituency became the 4th woman to be murdered in just 6 weeks in Northern Ireland. It remains one of the most dangerous places in Europe to be a woman, with a femicide rate that is twice the rate of that of Britain. And we need to think very deeply about the type of society we have created that is manifesting in this way. The publication of the Northern Ireland Strategy on Violence Against Women recently was overdue and very welcome. Does the Minister agree with me that the funding and human resources attached to that strategy must be proportionate with the urgency and the deep roots of this issue? And will she support the Executive as they review the sentencing and judicial processes that are contributing to these very preventable deaths?
My thoughts are with the family and friends and all those affected by the murder of Mary Ward. Every woman deserves to feel safe. There is what's been called an epidemic of violence against women and girls in Northern Ireland, and I do join with the member in welcoming the new strategy. We need stronger action by the justice system, more support for frontline services, tackling harassment wherever it is, in homes, schools, workplaces and on our streets, and challenging and changing misogynistic attitudes and behaviours. That will need urgent action, working together. This government stands ready to do this.
Sir David Davis.
I don't normally get such a cheer, sir. Number 9.
I meet regularly with the Chief Constable and his team to discuss a range of issues. While the Chief Constable has operational independence, the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office provides oversight of these powers to ensure that their use is necessary, proportionate and in accordance with the law.
David Davis.
Well, in a recent Investigatory Powers Tribunal, it became apparent that the Northern Ireland Police Force had been caught surveilling journalists' telephones on the basis that they had received secret documents from whistleblowers. The reason for the secrecy of those documents was to cover up the embarrassment of the RUC and the handling of the Loughlin Island massacre. Will he meet me to discuss the future use of surveillance powers by the Northern Ireland Police?
Well, I am indeed aware of the background to this case, and the original search warrants were quashed. And the police investigation was discontinued. The Investigatory Powers Tribunal, as the Right Honourable Gentleman will know, is currently looking at this specific case. It would not be appropriate for me to comment while that's ongoing. The Chief Constable has set up the McCullough Review to look at the wider issue, and the Right Honourable Gentleman may well wish to make representations to that review.
We now come to questions to the Deputy Prime Minister, Adam Jogi.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I've been asked to reply. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is in Samoa to discuss shared opportunities in the Commonwealth, including how we work together to deliver economic growth. With increasing threats facing Britain, it is vital that we also strengthen the defence, security and cooperation with our allies. And that's why today this government signed a landmark defence agreement with Germany, which will help keep us safe and create hundreds of jobs. Mr Speaker, I know the whole House will join me in sending our best wishes to Sir Chris Hoy and his wife Zara. He is a true sporting legend, and the courage and positivities they have shown will inspire many others. Mr Speaker, I also send our condolences to those affected by the train crash in Powys. Mr Speaker, this morning I have had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. For 14 years, my constituents in Newcastle-under-Lyme had suffered flatlining wages, in-work poverty and a battered economy that served nobody. Can I urge the Deputy Prime Minister to use the Employment Rights Bill to turn the page on the last 14 years, to give our businesses the support they need, and to finally restore dignity, prosperity and opportunity to the good people of Newcastle-under-Lyme?
Can I thank my honourable friend and welcome my honourable friend to his place? When this government took office, we promised the biggest upgrade to workers' rights in a generation, a new deal for working people. We said that we would introduce a bill within the first 100 days, and we've kept that promise. This is a Labour government led by working people for working people.
Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I join the Deputy Prime Minister in paying tribute to the bravery of Sir Chris Hoy? He truly is an inspiration to us all. And I also echo her comments about the train crash in Powys. Mr Speaker, what is the Deputy Prime Minister's definition of working people?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, let me start by welcoming the honourable gentleman to his new place. Today is our first exchange, Mr Speaker, since he pushed for a July general election. And if his own side hasn't offered him a peerage, I certainly would have. And Mr Speaker, the definition of working people are the people that the Tory party have failed for the last 14 years.
Oliver Dowden.
Well, the Deputy Prime Minister stood on a manifesto promising not to raise taxes on working people. It now appears she can't even define who working people are. So I'll give her another go. There are 5 million small business owners in this country. Are they working people?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I don't know how the shadow Deputy Prime Minister can stand there with a straight face when it was the small businesses, the working people of this country that paid the price of them crashing the economy, sending interest rates scoring. I think he needs to learn his own lessons in opposition.
Oliver Dowden.
Well, I think the whole House will have heard the Deputy Prime Minister disregard 5 million hard-working small business owners. These are the publicans, the shopkeepers, the family running a local cafe. None of those count as working people to her. Now, Labour gave a clear commitment not to raise national insurance. The independent IFS have given their view on this. They say that raising employer national insurance is a tax on working people. Even the Chancellor said that raising employer national insurance was a jobs tax that will make each new recruit more expensive and increase the cost to business. So does she agree with the IFS and her own Chancellor?
Mr Speaker, I remember the party opposite, what they said to business. What was it, F to business? Whereas this party held an international investment summit last week, which poured £63 million into our economy. We're pro-business, pro-worker and getting on with fixing the mess that they left behind.
So I think we can take it from that answer that the Deputy Prime Minister doesn't agree with the IFS, and I suppose it shouldn't come as a surprise that she doesn't agree with her Chancellor. But does she agree with this? and I quote, "Working people will pay when employers pass on the hike in national insurance." Mr. Speaker, these are her words. So does she at least agree with herself?
Mr. Speaker, what I'm incredibly proud of is this week this government brought in a new employment bill which will raise the living standards of 10 million workers. Would the Shadow Deputy Prime Minister like to apologise for the hiking taxes, 70-year hiking taxes that he put on working people, the crashing of the economy and the disaster that he left behind?
Well, she mentions her policy. Let's be clear, it's a £5 billion hit to the British economy, and that's her own assessment. Mr. Speaker, I think that following these answers, there will be millions of working people now even more worried about the tax rises coming their way in next week's budget. But as this is our last exchange across the dispatch box, I'd like to turn to somebody I hope we can all agree is a hard-working person, His Majesty the King. Yeah. Will she join me in sending him best wishes ahead of the Commonwealth Summit in Samoa? In particular, will she confirm that this government recognises the unique role played by the Commonwealth? And will she commit to deepening this relationship so that under His Majesty's leadership, we build upon possibly the greatest legacy of the late Queen?
Yeah. Deputy Prime Minister.
I will miss our exchanges. The battle of the gingers, the late nights voting. And in that spirit, Mr. Speaker, I will agree with my right honourable friend. The King does a tremendous job, and so did the late Queen, and the Commonwealth is very important, and that's why the King and the Prime Minister at the moment are working together. Thank you.
Yeah. Oliver Dowden.
Well, I thank the Right Honourable Lady for that answer. Our Commonwealth family is brought together by historical and cultural ties, indeed, much like the pair of us. But I will resist, Mr. Speaker, the temptation to replicate that. But as we look to the Commonwealth's future, we now have the opportunity to deepen our economic relationship. Will she therefore assure the House that the Prime Minister will use this summit to continue the work begun by the last government in building deeper economic ties with our Commonwealth friends and allies?
Yeah. Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we talk about economics. The architect of the 2024 Tory general election campaign, doing his victory lap before retiring with the hereditary peers that he fought so hard to protect. He leaves behind a Tory party in utter denial, heads in the sand, refusing to accept the rejection by the British public. Their plan for Britain, Mr. Speaker, includes scrapping the minimum wage, cutting maternity pay and tax breaks for the big oil companies. Mr. Speaker, this Labour government is elected to end the Tory chaos.
Dr Evans, you've got a sore neck. I wish it was your throat a little. Come on, Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, they don't like to hear it, but this Labour government was elected to end the Tory chaos, and that's exactly what we're doing. £600 more in the pockets of insecure workers, 30,000 new dads given paternity leave, and 10 million working people better off. While their so-called leadership candidates argue about what went wrong, this Labour government is getting on with rebuilding Britain.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, like many MPs, have heard many heartrending stories of constituents who have had poor end-of-life support. Yet, had palliative care been available alongside an end-of-life plan, their experiences could have been so different. Would the Deputy Prime Minister agree to set up a commission for palliative and end-of-life care so that everyone can access the very best support when terminally ill and have a peaceful and dignified death, and will she meet to discuss it?
Yeah. I thank my right honourable friend for raising what is an emotive subject on both sides of this House. I know from my own work in this area before I was in this place what an incredible work this is and the honour it is to be there for somebody at the end of their life. Discussions have begun now on how to improve access to palliative and end-of-life care, and I'll ensure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss this issue.
Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I associate myself and the Liberal Democrats with the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks about Chris Hoy and all those involved in the train crash. Our NHS is bracing itself for a winter crisis. And one of the causes of the winter crisis every year is that there are thousands of people in hospitals who are fit to go home, but they can't be discharged because there are not the care workers in place to enable people to recover at home or in a care home. Will the Deputy Prime Minister consider the Liberal Democrats' idea of an NHS winter task force to winter-proof our NHS, end this cycle of the winter crisis and put to an end the scandal of hospital patients paying the price of the social care crisis left by the Conservatives?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her comments, and I share with her her desire to ensure that care workers are given the respect and the importance that they deserve. They are critical, in my opinion, to solving the problems within our National Health Service, and it's the Labour Party that will create a national care service, and we're launching our first ever fair pay agreement for care professionals to boost recruitment and retention. We must get the NHS back on its feet after the disaster of the Conservatives, and my right honourable friend the Chancellor will have more to say in the budget.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for her answer. We stand ready as a party of constructive opposition to work with the government to fix our social care system. However, one of the measures that could make it harder for us to keep the carers that we so desperately need would be an increase in employers' national insurance contributions. Were that measure to go ahead, it would affect millions of small businesses, including 18,000 small care providers. Can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister to assure this House that there will be nothing in the budget that makes it harder for vulnerable people to access the care workers and the care that they desperately need?
Well, again, I won't speculate on the budget, not least with the Chancellor sat at the side of me. But what I will say, and I'll reiterate what the Chancellor has said and what the Prime Minister has said, this will be a budget that recognises that working people of this country and the enterprise in this country has been hard hit by the 14 years of Conservatives. We will rebuild Britain and we will grow our economy to pay for our public services.
Chris MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This next year marks the 200th anniversary of the Stockton to Darlington Railway, but the rail industry in my area is currently in peril, with hundreds of jobs at risk at Hitachi Rail as a consequence of a lack of action from the previous government. Will my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, join me and our honourable friend, the member for Newton Aycliffe and Spennymoor, with workers, management and trade unions to ensure that no stone is left unturned as we fight for the future of this Hitachi Rail factory?
I thank my right honourable friend for that question and welcome him to his place. He's been a champion for workers at Newton Aycliffe from day one, and I know he's met with the Transport Secretary, and I can assure him that we're in close contact with Hitachi on operations to secure a sustainable future for Newton Aycliffe, and we're committed to a long-term industrial strategy for rolling stock, seeking to support British manufacturing and end the volatility of recent years.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In today's spirit of cross-party working, will the Deputy Prime Minister join me in applauding the brave Labour staff members who've travelled across the Atlantic to campaign against Donald Trump?
Mr. Speaker, I'm loving this loving. I don't often get it. What I say to the honourable gentleman is that people in their own time often go and campaign, and that's what we've seen. It happens in all political parties. People go and campaign and they do what they want to do in their own time with their own money.
Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like many in my constituency of Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, my family knows what it means to raise and support a disabled child. Charities like the Yard in Kirkcaldy do an amazing job providing vital additional help to disabled children and their families. Last month, a survey found that our country is so broken that 3/4 of parents of children with special educational needs and disabilities have been forced to give up work or cut their hours. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree that our Labour government must tackle this intolerable reality?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend and pay tribute to those that work with children with special educational needs and disabilities. I myself have my amazing son who does tremendously well given his challenges that he faced in life. I know from personal experience the system is just not working for children and families. Future funding decisions will need to be taken as part of the upcoming spending review, Mr Speaker, but we will work with the sector to deliver our shared mission and restore parents' trust.
Peter Bedford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just 3 months into this Labour government, we have seen brutal cuts to support for pensioners. We have seen the taxing of education. And we have seen, just this week, £5 billion of additional pressure put on British businesses. Why does this government have such a problem with aspiration?
Mr Speaker, the honourable member might not have been in this place, and I welcome him to his place now during the last Parliament, but it was his government that left a £22 billion backlog. It was his government that left us with the biggest housing crisis. It was his government that crashed the economy, and it was his government that saw interest rates, inflation go to 11%, where pensioners were worse off than they are now.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Deputy Prime Minister, I watched in horror and condemned the act of October the 7th by the terrorist group Hamas. A year later, I watched in horror as 42,000 people are killed in Gaza, 11,000 of them children, people burned alive, attached to drips, aid workers killed, and now families are starving. Our right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has said that the world will not stand by and see this the lack of humanitarian assistance. If the Israeli government will not listen to our Prime Minister's words, what tangible, measurable actions will we take as a UK-British government?
I thank my honourable friend for raising this really serious and important issue. The humanitarian situation in northern Gaza, Mr Speaker, is dire, and we need an immediate ceasefire and much more aid allowed to flow in and an immediate release of all the hostages. We have suspended UK export licences to Israel for items which might be used in the current conflict, and this government has concluded that there is a clear risk that items exported to Israel might be used in serious violations of international humanitarian law in Gaza. This does not change our position, Mr Speaker, instead support for Israel's security, but we will always do so in a manner consistent with our obligations to domestic and international law.
David Simmons.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, our child protection services have had to deal with a number of cases where parents and carers have argued that their fatal actions were lawful punishment. So I'd like to ask the Deputy Prime Minister, will she bring forward legislation bringing the rest of our country into line with Scotland and Wales so that all children enjoy unambiguous protection in law against violence?
I think it's a very important point that the right honourable gentleman raises, and I'll make sure that the Minister has a meeting with him. But the first job of any government is to protect the citizens, and that includes our children, and we'll make sure we work across the House to deliver that.
Caroline Harris.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last Friday was International Menopause Day, and the government announced Mariella Frostrop as the new Menopause Employment Ambassador. Mariella will be working across Whitehall to ensure every department recognises the need to support women through their menopausal years. Hopefully, Mr Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister will join me in celebrating this appointment and confirm that this government will do all they can to keep menopausal women happy, healthy and wonderful.
Absolutely, Mr Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for all of her work in this area. This government will boost protections for women experiencing menopause symptoms at work, and I'm proud that we've appointed Mariella Frostrop as the new Menopause Employment Ambassador. She is a powerful champion who will work with employers across the country to raise awareness, improve workplace support for women and help them stay in work and progress in their careers.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Charlie from my constituency of Esher and Walton is an 8-year-old boy with an autism diagnosis who has been out of school for almost a year. He is one of 1,800 children in Surrey missing school because of a lack of appropriate special educational needs provision. Will the government commit to ending this scandal by properly funding special educational needs provision in next week's budget so that children like Charlie in my constituency of Esher and Walton and beyond are no longer let down?
I thank the honourable member for her very important question, and I'm sorry to hear about what Charlie and many other children with special educational needs have gone through. We know we've inherited a really dire situation. Many members across this House have raised this issue, and that I'm sure the Chancellor have heard what she said and that she will be upcoming in the budget.
Mike Sharp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning we woke to more tragic news of deaths in the Channel, something that we're hearing far too often. Just last month we saw the death of a pregnant woman and children. Children, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Deputy Prime Minister what this government is doing to take on the evil smuggling gangs who are trading in human misery.
I thank my honourable friend and welcome him to this place and his expertise within the National Crime Agency. And he knows that we inherited an asylum system in chaos. And as he quite rightly says, these are people, women, children. We are putting in place a credible plan to protect our borders and remove those with no right to be here by setting up our Border Security Command, backed by £75 million of investment, and we're working with our international partners to target and disrupt the criminal smuggling gangs.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
Will the government please continue to work closely with West Lindsey District Council and myself to ensure that RAF Scampton is sold off in a timely fashion at a fair price so that we secure the future of the runway, the spaceport and the Heritage Centre, rather than maximise value and cover it with housing?
I thank the honourable member, the Father of the House, for his question. My right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is taking urgent action to clear the backlog of cases, reducing the use of asylum accommodation and saving millions for the taxpayers. And I will ensure that the right honourable member is kept fully updated as the decommissioning disposal process of Scampton is followed.
Dame Meg Hilliard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in my constituency, hundreds of leaseholders, tenants and shared owners are living in properties with cladding and other defects in their properties, and thousands around the country. Their lives are on hold. Many are facing bankruptcy, delaying having children, unable to move. We've had another change in ministerial responsibility. Will the Deputy Prime Minister take a personal lead on keeping on top of this? Because after the years since Grenfell, they're still living in limbo and need some hope of change.
I thank my honourable friend for this really important question. And I say from the outset, the pace of remediation has been too slow. And I do take a personal lead in this. 7 years on from the Grenfell Tower tragedy, it is unacceptable that so many buildings still have unsafe cladding. I'm meeting with developers, mayors, regulators and national building safety bodies to press the urgency of this work. And I will make sure action is being taken to make sure that homes are safe.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Shropshire's farmers have been suffering from flooding following 18 months of incredibly wet weather, topped off last Wednesday by in 24 hours by the month's worth of rain. They weren't eligible for the Farming Recovery Fund, and a Freedom of Information request by Farmers Weekly found that only £1.2 million of that £50 million has been handed out to farmers. Will the government consider extending the eligibility of that scheme so that we can keep farmers going when they're deluged by floodwater?
Well, I'm really sorry to hear the plight of the Shropshire farmers, and we inherited a flood defence programme in disrepair. Thanks to 14 years of mismanagement and failure, communities are unprotected and families and businesses are forced to pay the price. We launched a flood defence task force to turbocharge the delivery and coordination of flood defences, and we're investing in £1.5 billion this year to scale up flooding national resilience. And I'll make sure she gets a meeting with the Minister.
Anna Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has delivered on its manifesto commitment to introduce the Employment Rights Bill in its first... This includes a historic fair pay agreement for care workers and will benefit all those who care for older and disabled adults like those in my constituency of Shipley. Will the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that care workers deserve pay and conditions that match the amazing work they do to support our loved ones to have a fulfilling life?
I thank my honourable friend and welcome her to her place. As a biased former care worker, I'll always champion carers and the complex quality and professional work that they do. I absolutely agree that care workers deserve the pay and conditions to match their enormous contribution to our community, and I'm proud to say that we're delivering that fair pay agreement that will give the carers the recognition that they deserve and will make sure that those carers are able to deliver the best possible care to our loved ones.
James McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, a widely reported study from Aston University Business School showed that UK goods exports to the EU are 27% down and imports 32% lower than they would otherwise have been, thanks to the Conservatives' failed Brexit deal. Will the Deputy Prime Minister tell me what steps this government is taking as part of their reset with the EU to cut Brexit red tape for small businesses to help our economy get growing again?
Well, I welcome the right honourable member to his place and his right to advocate for small businesses. They are the backbone of our economy. This government is turning the page on the relationship with Europe, reinvigorating alliances and forging new partnerships rather than reopening the divisions of the past. We will improve the UK's trade and investment relationship with the EU, tearing down unnecessary barriers to trade. This will not involve rejoining the single market, customs union or reintroducing freedom of movement, but we will get that relationship better.
Rachel Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 27,000 people in the cities of London and Westminster live in the private rented sector. After 14 years of neglect and delay, they face damp and mould in their homes, they risk no-fault eviction and out-of-the-blue rent hikes. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that the Renters' Right Bill currently in committee will transform life for private renters and finally rebalance power between tenants and landlords?
I thank my honourable friend and I welcome her to this place. And I'm incredibly proud of the Renters' Rights Bill that we're pushing through Parliament, because too many renters are being exploited by a minority of unscrupulous landlords unable to challenge bad practices because they could be evicted at any moment. The party opposite shunters, they promised the electorate this, they failed to deliver. We will deliver.
Blake Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Communities across the country, including in Bedfordshire, recently experienced widespread flooding. The village of Malden in my constituency has experienced an increase in flooding following cumulative housing development. As the Deputy Prime Minister requires communities across the country to build more homes, will she also ensure that those new developments do not increase flooding risk?
Again, I thank the honourable member for raising and also welcome him to his place. We recognise the devastating impact flooding can have. I know the flooding minister visited Bedfordshire in September to meet with volunteers and residents. We inherited flood defences that are in disrepair and behind schedule. We've launched a flood resilience task force, and when it comes to the planning reforms, Mr. Speaker, needed to deliver the 1.5 million homes this country needs, we will ensure that the right infrastructure is in place and communities are resilient.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Zoe's Place in the West Derby area of Liverpool is a hospice providing support to sick children and their families. It's been threatened with closure, has to find £5 million by the end of the year. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that hospices like these need to be on a statutory footing and not reliant on charitable funding?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and the hospice situation in this country has faced significant challenges because of the 14 years of devastation under the Conservatives. The Health Secretary has already raised these issues and knows that this is of importance, and I'll make sure she gets a meeting.
Final question, Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Deputy Prime Minister will know that my constituency and Lincolnshire as a whole is the breadbasket of Britain, producing 12% of the food that's consumed across the entire nation, 30% of the vegetables, 20% of the sugar beet and so on. She will know that's because of the Grade 1 and 2 land in Lincolnshire. And yet Lincolnshire faces an invasion of giant pylons down the East Coast and huge solar developments. So will she meet a delegation of colleagues from Lincolnshire and nearby, including my referendum from Louth and Sleaford and the Farnborough Hills, so that we can establish that energy security must never be the competitor with food security?
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question, and he will know that we launched a consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework. We will protect agricultural land. We will ensure that we have renewable energy, so we have energy security in this country, and we will get Britain building again.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. I'll let the front benches change over. Bench is not just to keep walking through, but to do the statements. Right. Secretary of State for the Environment and Rural Affairs, Steve Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, I would like to update the House on action this government is taking to fundamentally transform our water industry and clean up our waterways for good. 14 years of Conservative failure has left our water sector in disrepair. The rivers, lakes and seas we all love have record levels of pollution. Severe droughts are set to leave parts of the country facing significant water shortages by 2050, particularly in the southeast. And water companies forecast England will need to find an extra 5 billion litres of water a day to fill the gap between supply and demand by that same year. A rising population and the increasing impacts of climate change are putting strain on the water system. Firmer action should have been taken by the previous government to ensure money was invested to fix the water and sewage system. Instead, they allowed that money to be siphoned off for bonuses while our water infrastructure crumbled. A secure water supply is essential for every home and business up and down this country. It is the foundation of our economy, our communities, and our global security. It is essential to life itself. We use water to cool power stations, and it is vital to our electricity supply. We use water to grow the crops that provide the food we put on our plates, and we use it to supply our leisure industries. Without a resilient water supply, we cannot build the new homes and critical infrastructure we need to grow the economy. Concerns about pollution, water shortages, bill increases, and the sector's financial resilience all point to the need for profound change. The water sector needs a complete reset, with a reformed water sector working in partnership with government to bring in the investment we need. We need a clear long-term plan to ensure the sector puts customers and the environment first and can attract the investment to upgrade our infrastructure. We need a water system fit for the future. We cannot clean up our rivers, lakes and seas overnight, but we have a plan and the work of change has started. On the 11th of July, I made a statement to the House on the agreement I reached with water companies and Ofwat to ring-fence money earmarked for investment in water infrastructure so it can no longer be diverted for shareholder payouts and undeserved bonus payments. On the 9th of September, we introduced the Water Special Measures Bill, setting out new measures, including strengthening regulation to ensure water bosses face personal criminal liability for serious and repeated law-breaking, giving the water regulator new powers to ban the payment of bonuses if environmental standards are not met, and boosting accountability for water executives through a new code of conduct. Today, I'm pleased to announce the third stage of our plan. We are launching an independent commission together with the Welsh Government, which will lead the biggest review of the water industry since privatisation 35 years ago. The Commission will ensure we have the robust regulatory framework we need to attract the significant investment required to clean up our waterways, build new infrastructure to address water scarcity and restore public confidence in the sector. I am delighted it will be led by the former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, Sir John Cunliffe, who comes with decades of economic and regulatory experience. Sir John will be supported by an advisory group of experts covering areas including the environment, public health, engineering, customers, investors and economics. He will seek advice from wider groups of stakeholders, including environmental campaigners, consumer champions, water companies, regulators and the public at large. The Commission will conduct a root and branch review of the water sector's regulatory system. It will cover the water industry in England and Wales and the strategic planning framework under the Water Framework Directive and River Basin Management Plans to ensure strategic water planning across sectors is effective at a catchment, regional and national scale. Where housing, planning and agriculture and drainage interlink with strategic planning across the water system, these are also in scope. The Commission will set a new framework for the future. It will not make recommendations which affect the current Price Review 24 process to ensure a stable climate for investment as that process concludes. It will be pragmatic and focus on reforms that will improve the privatised regulatory model. Nationalisation of the water sector will not be in scope because of the high costs of buying out the current owners, lack of evidence that it would lead to improvements, and the long delays it would cause in cleaning up polluted water and serving customers better. The Commission will make recommendations in the first half of 2025, reporting to me as the Secretary of State for the Environment and to the Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Climate Change and Rural Affairs in Wales. Once the Commission has made its recommendations, the UK Government and Welsh Government will respond and consult on proposals, including subsequent legislation. Further details on the Commission's scope, delivery approach and timelines are set out in its terms of reference, which will be available on gov.uk today. This Government will deliver an ambitious, long-term and collaborative approach to reforming the water sector, creating a strong new partnership between government, water companies, customers, investors and all those who work to protect our precious environment. The Commission will set the groundwork for the reformed water sector we want to see, and I would like to thank Sir John for leading this important work. This is our opportunity to make sure our children and their children have the chance to create memories that will last a lifetime, to splash about at the seaside, to row on our rivers, or enjoy a picnic by the lakeshore. This is our opportunity to inject billions of pounds into the economy and power UK growth by attracting global investment into a transformed water sector. This is our opportunity to clean up our water once and for all.
Shadow Minister Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for prior sight of his statement. 14 years in opposition, and this is what the Labour Party has to offer. When they've had more than a decade to craft a clear package of policies, listen to campaigners and prepare to govern, and yet this is what they've brought to the House today, which illustrates, Mr. Speaker, not a sign of any ambition. Mr. Speaker, this is a sign of hesitation. It's a way to delay the difficult decisions and buy themselves more time. It's part of a growing trend that, unfortunately, we're seeing consistently from this new Labour government. Across all government departments, announce a review, a task force, and yet another commission, and the hope that the public doesn't notice that really they never had much of a plan at all. Mr. Speaker, this approach is simply not going to wash with the bill payers. During the election, the Secretary of State was touring around the country with campaigners like Fergal Sharkey, promising radical change to the sector. But here, he's now in power, and if you look at it, this what has he actually achieved so far? The Secretary of State spent the entire election campaign, for example, telling voters that he wanted to put water company bosses, quote, in the dock, unquote. But if you look at what they've actually achieved through the announcements of their water special measures bill, it will not do such a thing, as campaigners and industry experts have already pointed out. And what this water special measures bill will also do is provide no reassurance whatsoever to investors. In fact, the Secretary of State has rather marvellously managed to frustrate not only campaigners, but also disenfranchise investors from any long-term aspirations for their investment within the sector. Next, the Secretary of State says that he announced a ban on water company bonuses. But hang on, that was actually a policy that we brought forward in our time in government, which the Secretary of State is now attempting to re-announce and pass off as his own. It was the Conservatives that announced a ban on water company bosses, linked shareholder dividends to environmental performance, quadrupled water company inspections, fast-tracked investment to cut spills, and launched a whistleblowing portal for water company workers to report breaches. It's frankly surprising then to hear the Secretary of State claim that his government is truly serious about this issue, when their proposals are less firm than the measures that were delivered by the previous Conservative government. He could take real action right now by progressing plans for an automatic ban on water company bosses' bonuses when offences take place, as put forward by the last Conservative administration. And, Mr Speaker, rehashing announcements the previous Conservative government already set in motion, putting forward policies that won't actually put more pressure on water company bosses, and then simply pressing pause with a year-long review is not going to result in the widespread change that Labour promised their voters. Mr Speaker, the Secretary of State acknowledges as well that the announced review will make no recommendations which will affect the current Price Review 24 process, meaning that there will be no chance of any significant change that this government is considering making until 2029 at the earliest. So, could I ask the Secretary of State to provide an outline of the timeframe associated with actual recommendations which will come from the review being implemented and put in place? When is any real benefit from this further review task force commission likely to be experienced, not only from the water industry in terms of infrastructure improvements, but also by the bill player and improvements on the environment? Because it seems to me that this is just a Secretary of State kicking the can down the road through another review, another task force and another commission, and removing himself from having to do any of or make any of the tough decisions. The Secretary of State also makes reference within his statement that the review will not impact the Price Review 24 process. So could the Secretary of State outline exactly when these positive impacts will take place? Because from my calculations, it's not going to be until 2029 at the earliest. Could the Secretary of State also outline how the review will impact measures which are proposed by the government on the Water Special Measures Bill, and what will be done if the recommendations do not sync comfortably with the current proposals in the bill? Mr Speaker, one can't help but conclude that the Secretary of State is out of depth on this issue, can't deliver on the tough language that he promised in the run-up to the general election, and is now doing nothing more than attempting to kick the tough decisions down the road into the long grass. Mr Speaker, this seems to be a Secretary of State which is all bark and no bite.
Well, that was all a little bit embarrassing, wasn't it? 14 years in power, our rivers, lakes and seas are washed with record levels of pollution, and this is all the Conservatives have to say. I took action 7 days after the general election. I brought the water chief execs into my office, and we agreed that money earmarked for investment will be ring-fenced, so it can't be diverted to pay multi-million-pound bonuses to water chief execs who are overseeing failure in the water sector, as they were able to on his watch. This commission will reset the sector they broke and clean up the water they polluted, and it will report to this government in June and inform subsequent legislation.
Giamora.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And at the weekend, I went swimming in the North Sea, probably the last time this year, but having first checked with the Surfers Against Sewage website that there had not been any legal or illegal spills. It is disgraceful that the last Conservative government left our seas and waterways in this state, but also notable that Water UK continuously blame the regulator for not allowing them to raise prices enough to invest further in our system. Would the Secretary of State make sure that we assess the extraction of value that the water companies in billions in profits and hundreds of millions in bonuses to make sure that future investment adds value and doesn't take it away?
Yeah. I thank my honourable friend for her comments. Customers, unfortunately, have been left to pay the price of 14 years of Conservative failure to secure investment in our water infrastructure, so it has collapsed to such an extent that Ofwat is now recommending eye-watering bill increases. Every penny of that is down to the failure of the party opposite. Our reset will ensure that kind of catastrophic failure can never happen again.
Spokesperson Tim Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm really grateful to the Secretary of State for an advance sight of this statement, and to a very large degree, I welcome it, at least the intention behind it. But we have a situation where water companies in 2023 dumped 54% more sewage into our lakes and our rivers and our coastal areas than in the previous year. That is 464,000 spills, including many in the lakes and rivers of Westmoreland. We are, Mr. Speaker, the most beautiful part of England and also the wettest. And so water is deeply personal to us. So does he understand, then, my worry that we might have gone from having a Conservative government that would not face up to this outrage or tackle it, to having a new Labour administration that has acknowledged this outrage and decisively resolved to have a jolly good think about it? Does he wonder, while Thames Water crumbles as we speak, and while water companies seek water bill increases of 40% despite such poor performance across the country, does he really think that having a commission is necessary given the urgent need for action? We have a fragmented, under-resourced and underpowered regulatory system which allows powerful water companies to play regulators off against each other while our constituents pay the price. So isn't the solution obvious? To create, as the Liberal Democrats propose, a new, unified, far more powerful, clean water authority? Does he share my deep concern that for environmental failure, the current regulator has to give 25 years' notice in order to strip a water company of its licence? Will he agree to ensure that this ludicrous protection for failing companies should be replaced by a 6-month period of notice instead? We are already more than 5% of the way through this Parliament. This is one of the constituents, all of our constituents' most pressing concerns. Do we have to drag our heels like this?
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his comments, and of course he's absolutely right to point out that last year we saw the highest levels of sewage ever recorded in our rivers, lakes and seas. No wonder the public are so angry, including in his constituency, and Lake Windermere, of course, an iconic and beautiful site, tragically polluted with sewage and agricultural runoff because of the failures of the previous governments. Now, I've taken action already. We had that reset moment just 7 days after the general election, carrying out within a week things they failed to do in 14 years in power. We've got the special measures bill going through the Houses of Parliament right now to ban the payment of unfair bonuses to water bosses. This commission, led by Sir John Cunliffe, will look at the entire sector, root and branch, including governance and regulation, which he is pointing to, and it will look specifically at the point that he's just raised so that we can end up with a system of regulation that is fit to clean up our waterways and then protect them for the decades to come.
Torsten Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Secretary of State for his statement and for the announcement of this review, which is very important, and to have Sir John Cunliffe, a long-term public servant, running it is very welcome indeed. Can he say a bit more about how the close working between the Welsh and the UK government will work, because that will be very important to how this has effect for my constituents in Swansea West?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. Of course, he's alluding to a very important point. Rivers and water catchments are no respecters of boundaries, and it's important that we get a model that works within catchments, including where those cross boundaries, as they do in some cases between England and Wales. This review has been jointly commissioned by the UK and the Welsh governments. It will jointly report to both governments, and it will seek to look at a better model for structuring and supporting our water sector so that we can ensure that we clean up all of our rivers, all of our lakes, all of our seas, so the public can get back to enjoying them, and we can bring in the investment to support the infrastructure delivered at pace to drive economic growth in every single part of the United Kingdom.
We come to the Chair of the Select Committee, Alistair Carmichael.
Speaker, the Secretary of State is quite right to point to the role of the payment of bonuses and dividends in coming to this point, but he must surely acknowledge that that is far from being the whole story, and that there are a number of business and accounting practices in companies like Thames Water that have brought us to the stage where we are today. If he's serious about having a water system that's fit for the future, we have to understand properly what has gone on before. So can he confirm that the Commission will be properly resourced with the necessary forensic accounting resource so that those who have been responsible for the most egregious practice in the past, who now seem to be appearing in other water companies around the country, will not be allowed to do the same thing there?
Well, I thank the Chair of the Select Committee for his intervention and the points that he makes. Of course, he's right. The Special Measures Bill with the ban on bonuses is not going to be sufficient to reset the sector, although it is an ask that the public are quite rightly making because of the unfairness of people who are overseeing failure being richly rewarded for that failure. It should not have been allowed to go on under the previous government. It will not go on under this new government. Now, the reason we've set up this commission is to address the very points he makes about financial and indeed environmental sustainability and viability moving into the future. I look forward to working with him and his committee as the Commission carries out its work, as we review its findings in the summer of next year, and as we then shape what will be very, very significant new legislation to reset the sector, a reformed sector in a new partnership with government to bring in the investment that will finally clean up our waterways.
Helena Dollimore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I declare an interest as a customer of Southern Water who lost my water supply for 5 days earlier this year, along with 30,000 of my constituents in Hastings and Rye. As the Secretary of State knows well from his visits to Hastings and to Rye, we have major issues from flooding to sewage to water outages. I welcome this Water Commission, and can I ask the Secretary of State how my constituents in Hastings and Rye, and particularly volunteer groups like the Clean Water Action Group, can have their voices heard, and particularly their concerns about ensuring regulators have the power and resources to clean up our sea?
I thank my honourable friend. She is indeed a powerful campaigner for cleaner water. It's hard to think of anybody who has campaigned harder on the issue in fact. The Commission will be seeking to engage the public at large, as well as a wider group of stakeholders who will be represented on an advisory group. That will also include a customer voice. Once the Commission has reported, the Government will consult on those findings, and that will inform subsequent legislation that will reset this sector once and for all.
Can I just gently say to the Secretary of State, I'm here and we're going through the chair, not to the member, not once for the last two questions. So if we can work together to get everybody to work in the right way. We'll have a good example now, Mr. Gavin Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in my constituency of Stone, Great Worley and Penkridge, we have beautiful rivers, the great and mighty River Trent, as well as the River Penk. And over the last few years, with more transparent data that is available, we've been seeing the number of sewage discharges going into these rivers. Can the Secretary of State promise the House that actually looking at how we reduce those sewage discharges into the Trent and into the River Penk are going to be at the heart of what this Commission does?
Yes, it's always a pleasure, of course, to gaze at you, Mr. Speaker, rather than elsewhere in the chamber. The right honourable gentleman makes a very important point. Of course, the point of the Commission is to identify ways in which we can strengthen regulation and operations so that we can bring in the investment, clean up our water sector once and for all, and reduce and remove the pollution that is destroying so many beautiful rivers, including those in his constituency.
Tony Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, can I just congratulate the Secretary of State for this commission that's been set up today, because it is absolutely fantastic. Gower is the first area of outstanding natural beauty in the whole of the United Kingdom. The bathing waters there are second to none, but some of them are less so. And I'd like to highlight to him how I have set up a campaign to test the bathing water in the winter season with my constituents and with local business and the Gower Society, because data, as has been said, is really, really key and is what will drive the improvement of our bathing water forward. So would he congratulate Surfers Against Sewage, who have been really supportive, and everybody in my constituency that's taken part and taken control. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank my honourable friend. She does indeed represent an incredibly beautiful part of the country in the Gower, and her constituents, and indeed many of those who visit those beauty spots, will want to know that their children can go and enjoy the water without risk of contamination from polluted water. Of course, I congratulate Surfers Against Sewage, the many campaigners who have pushed for reform. They will be invited to participate in the work of the Commission as well. They have huge expertise, and I hope that before long, her constituents who are testing the quality of the water will start to see improvements until it is pure and crystal clear, as it should always have been.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Secretary of State highlights the scandal of sewage in our seas and rivers. Indeed, last year, raw sewage was dumped into rivers and seas for 3.6 million hours. But since privatisation, 72 billion has been paid to shareholders in dividends, while his own department highlights that it would cost 56 billion to carry out the necessary investment. So privatisation has failed as a model for getting the investment in place. And will the Secretary of State therefore confirm that the Commission will look at the ownership model for water that's going to be effective in addressing this scandal, including considering the option of bringing water back into public hands?
Thank him for his comments and his question. The reason I've ruled out nationalisation is because that would not resolve the problems that we face. We saw in the Olympics in France the River Seine unable to be used for swimming because of pollution. That is a state-owned water system. We see the problems in Scotland. That is a state-owned water system as well. The problems are those of governance and regulation. If we were to look at nationalisation, that would cost up towards £100 billion of public money that doesn't exist, and the time it would take to unpick current models of ownership, during which time investment will be choked off, would see our rivers, lakes and seas filled with even more sewage and pollution rather than less. I'm more interested in the purity of our water than the purity of our ideology. I will do what works best as quickly as possible. The Commission will give us guidance on how we change the system to make sure it works for everybody.
Neil Duncan-Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the last few weeks, I've been conducting tests independently with colleagues from Bournemouth University into the lovely Poole Harbour and the waters surrounding there, testing for nitrates and bacteria. What I've noticed talking to colleagues is that the frequency of testing that goes on officially and the number of sites at which tests are carried out has been reduced significantly by the Environment Agency over the years. And I would like to ask the Secretary of State if his Commission will now look at those issues and whether testing and frequency of testing will be included in its work.
Yes, I recognise what he says about Poole Harbour. It is indeed an incredibly beautiful part of the country. I've visited myself several times, and sadly I've also seen the extent and impact of pollution. We are making sure that all sewage outlets are monitored through compulsory means, which isn't the case currently, but the Commission will be looking at how we can improve testing and monitoring of water quality as part of the strengthening of regulation that will form a key part of the Commission's work.
Charlie Dewhurst.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, the Secretary of State mentioned the importance of drainage in reducing pollution incidents caused by flooding. So will he commit to today, while we await the outcome of this commission, to distribute the £75 million allocated by the previous government to internal drainage boards so that farmers in my constituency and others in the River Hull catchment do not have to spend another winter underwater?
Well, unfortunately, he is referring to commitments to spend money that didn't exist. We're waiting for the Chancellor to announce her budget in almost exactly 1 week's time from this dispatch box. We'll find out much more then.
Jessica Tull.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, sewage was dumped 57 times into the precious coastline of my constituency, Bournemouth West, the equivalent of 594 hours of sewage spillage. Our constituents are rightly disgusted by the state of affairs. The Conservatives covered up this scandal for the last 14 years. Can the right honourable member tell me what this new Labour government will be doing to hold companies to account?
I thank her for her question. I had the pleasure of visiting Bournemouth West with her and saw for myself the impact it's having on businesses and tourism in that part of the world, because parents are frightened to let their kids go in the sea at certain times of the day when water contamination has reached unacceptable levels. The Commission will be looking at how we can strengthen regulation and governance to ensure that the practices water companies have got away with over recent years can no longer happen. It will also be looking at how we can bring in the investment that is needed to repair our broken water infrastructure so we can drive economic growth in every part of the country, including, of course, in Bournemouth West.
Lee Anders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now then, the use of storm overflows in places like Skegby in Ashford is absolutely disgusting, and it pollutes my rivers. So can the Secretary of State commit to giving the water companies a deadline to ending the use of storm overflows?
It will be for the Commission to look at what we need to do to improve infrastructure to fix the broken system that we have at the moment. We are making sure that every overflow has monitoring on it so we know exactly what is coming out of it, and we can therefore take action against the water companies that may be responsible for that.
Jane Kirk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Truro and Falmouth, my constituency, as well as sewage in our bathing waters this week, we've had sewage on the streets in Penryn. The party opposite cut funding to the regulator back in 2015. Could the Secretary of State please confirm that the role of the regulator will be completely reset by this review?
I thank her for her question, and of course I had the pleasure of visiting Truro and Falmouth during the election, and again saw for myself the problems that are happening there. It is of course disgusting to see sewage bubbling up into the streets and even into some people's back gardens, because sewage infrastructure is so broken because the previous government failed for 14 years to bring in the investment necessary to upgrade that infrastructure. This Commission will be looking at how we secure that funding, how we get the infrastructure rebuilt at pace so it can improve the situation that we're hearing about. It will also be looking at regulation and the role of the regulator itself to make proposals as to how we can improve that so we have regulation that is fit for purpose.
Earl Voldem.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Kingsbridge, in my constituency of South Devon, the residents are literally wading through sewage which is seeping out of the drains in heavy rains due to a mixture of increased sewage capacity due to new houses and ancient culverts which cannot cope. I don't think the residents of Kingsbridge are going to be encouraged by a review and a commission, because that's not going to solve the problems they're going to face this winter. So will the Minister meet with me to discuss this particularly difficult and chronic problem in Kingsbridge, because we need to find a solution, and it hasn't happened for a long time. We desperately need to sort this out.
Thank you. I have, of course, already taken action myself. I had the Water Chief Executives into my office just 7 days after the general election, where we agreed a programme of initial reforms, including ring-fencing customers' money earmarked for investment so it cannot be diverted to be spent on undeserved multi-million-pound bonuses or dividend payments. We have the Water Special Measures Bill going through the House of Lords right now, which will ban the payment of those undeserved bonuses. It's important we understand exactly what has gone wrong in the sector that has led to the situation where regulation does not meet the requirements of either the public or businesses or the economy or the environment. Those will be key proposals that will be coming out of this Commission, and I hope the Honourable Lady will welcome those when they come forward.
Alicia MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today, a report found that rivers in the East and London have the worst quality in the UK, with an alarming amount of chemicals found.
Citizen science has played a key role up to now in monitoring the quality of our water. Will the Secretary of State join with me in paying tribute to the citizen scientists and volunteers and assure us that their voices will be heard in this important work? Thank you.
She makes a very, very important point, of course. The many campaign groups, citizen scientists, have made a huge impact on, first of all, raising the profile of the sewage scandal affecting our country, but secondly, pointing to some of the ways that we can start to fix it. The Commission around Sir John will have an advisory group that will have representation from campaign groups and consumers on it. There will also be wide engagement with the public, both through the work of the Commission itself and subsequently as we work towards the reform legislation that will reset the sector once and for all.
Dr. Benspitz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the absence of a plan, it's always a good idea to do a review. And my constituents are being failed by our local sewage infrastructure, and Thames Water are a total and utter disgrace. But I really welcome the Secretary of State's statement today, because I think I've found an unlikely ally. The Labour government is going to force building on Greenbelt in my constituency with a whole host of new houses, exacerbated by the Liberal Democrat administration's Elmbridge failure to deliver a local plan. Given the amount of time this commission will take to report back and the fact these new houses will cause more sewage requirements, does he agree with me that we should pause and think again about the house building targets until the review has been completed?
Well, I thought he was standing up to apologise for the fact that the Conservative government did absolutely nothing for 14 years other than watch the torrent of effluent increase into our rivers, lakes and seas and pollute them. My honourable friend, the Water Minister, would be more than happy to meet with him to discuss the issues he raises from his constituency.
Billington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome this commission today from my right honourable friend, and would like to point out that last week, for example, in my constituency of East Thanet, 6 beaches were affected by raw sewage dumping. 2 of them, Joss Bay and Stone Bay, were deemed to be to have bad effect of their bathing quality, and yet the verdict was that they were still within the Environment Agency permitted limits. Can my right honourable friend confirm to me that we will have the Commission will investigate the regulatory standards so that when that raw sewage is dumped, there is actually a fine and a punishment for the water companies? I must admit, I must also make my own declaration as a customer of Southern Water and a seawater swimmer.
Yay!
I thank her very much for her question. She is, of course, a well-known environmental campaigner who stands up for her constituents in Thanet, and the many businesses, including tourism businesses, who are affected adversely by the appalling state of our waters. Of course, it is clear regulation and governance has been inadequate for a long time. This is a reset moment where we can finally strengthen that and deliver the clean water that her constituents and mine and all of ours across the House expect to see.
Anne Davies.
Mr Llavarydd. Water is devolved, but of course in Wales we do not have the full range of powers needed to address this scandal. For example, the Senedd cannot regulate the transfer of water by private companies whose catchment area straddles the border, and this of course includes the likes of Hafren and Dyfrdwy. Will the Secretary of State ensure that the Commission considers the full devolution of powers of water and sewage licensing to Wales to empower the Senedd to set higher targets? Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr. This commission is jointly set up by the UK Government and the Welsh Government, and it will report back to both, and it will inform actions that both governments will be taking subsequently, including looking at infrastructure and how we make catchment areas operate better, particularly and including when they cross the borders, as so many do between England and Wales.
Abdissam Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to congratulate the Secretary of State on this Independent Water Commission. I know my constituents will really welcome this review. My constituents in Sheffield Central are seeing a 25% rise in their bills. To them, it doesn't make sense why their bills are going up and the profits of shareholders continue to still be received. Will the Secretary of State give me some reassurance that there will be transparency as an outcome of this review, and that the water companies will be held to account, and that we will reset the focus on consumers instead of profit of companies?
I thank her for the very important point that she makes, and of course it's important that consumers have a very strong voice on the Commission. They will gain that through consumer representation on the advisory group that will be working with Sir John as the Commissioner. She points to the eye-watering level of bill increases that have been proposed by Ofwat already. That, alas, is the price of Tory failure. They allowed the water infrastructure to collapse to such an extent that it costs much more to fix it now than it would have cost had it been maintained properly through those 14 years. I can't undo the damage they caused. I can draw a line in the sand to make sure it can never, ever happen again.
Andrew George.
Mr. Speaker, when the Conservatives privatised water, they created risk-free money printing emporiums, which frankly could pollute our coasts, including my West Cornwall coast, at their convenience. Although the Secretary of State says that the nationalisation is not in scope, and one can understand why, to what extent is company governance going to be within scope, and is it likely that there is a possibility of moving it closer to becoming community benefit societies, or at least installing a community environmental champion who's not in the pay of the company on every board to keep a watch on these companies? Thank you.
Yeah. He makes very important points, and indeed the areas he's referring to will be in scope for the Commission. I hope he will make his own representations to ensure that those points are heard and fully considered before we get the findings in the summer of next year.
Alistair Strathern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Residents in my constituency have been disgusted by the degradation of our rural waterways right across the east of England, as well as the hollowing out of reservoir capacity right across the country. I really welcome the renewed leadership on these issues we're seeing from the new Secretary of State and the new government. But it's clear that under the last government, weakened regulation and weakened regulators played their part in facilitating the mess we've inherited. What assurances can he give my constituents that we will be beefing up the regulators, giving them the power they need to take the action we all want to see?
Well, he's absolutely right. It was the previous government deliberately weakened the regulators and kept regulation too weak to hold the water companies to account and ensure that we got the investment in that could have kept a better standard of infrastructure and stopped the level of pollution that his constituents and everyone else's have had to face. We've already taken steps through the Special Measures Bill to give the regulator more teeth. The Commission will be looking root and branch at the role of regulation and governance and the regulator to ensure that we have a system that is fit for the future and can ensure and guarantee clean waters for the decades to come.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, if I heard correctly, at the start of his statement, the Secretary of State referenced the River Lug. The River Lug runs through the centre of my constituency of North Herefordshire, and it has been subject, the catchment has been subject to a planning moratorium for more than 5 years because of excess levels of phosphate in that river. But the Secretary of State will be well aware that the reason for that is not sewage pollution primarily, it is agricultural runoff. More than 2/3 due to agricultural runoff, only 1/4 due to sewage. And yet, the Government's Water Commission makes essentially no mention of agriculture, just a passing reference. There is nothing in there specifically about addressing this problem. Likewise, the Water Special Measures Bill. With such a narrow approach to addressing water pollution, he will not be able to achieve his aim of cleaning up our rivers and seas. Will he agree with me that the terms of reference need to be changed to incorporate full attention on agricultural pollution as well as sewage? Thank you.
Well, I do hope she will look at the terms of reference which are available on gov.uk because, of course, they will be focusing on the whole catchment areas, and it includes agricultural runoff, which accounts for 45% of water pollution. And where there is an interface between agriculture and polluted water, that is indeed in scope for the work of the Commission.
No law.
I thank the Minister for his statement. And the destruction and contamination of our waterways and even our high streets, as we've seen from sewage pollution in Newquay the other week, is an absolute disgrace which the previous government has failed to address. So, with Pennon Group, our owner of South West Water, paying £112 million in dividends and over £160 million in other finance costs, will the Minister ensure that the Independent Commission, which I greatly welcome, addresses whether we have effective funding models for our water industry?
He's absolutely right. It's disgusting to people to see sewage bubbling up, not just in their high streets, but even in people's gardens. because of broken water infrastructure, and we will be looking for a reset so that we can have a water sector that works for customers and the environment as well as investors.
Alison Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Year 2 pupils of Bishop Tufnell's School in my Littlehampton and Bognor Regis constituency told me of their disappointment last year that they couldn't swim in the sea on their summer day out. As a fellow sea swimmer, I share their disappointment. But winter is coming. There is no time to waste. Pushing the can down the track with this review, this commission, is not good enough. And what I would like to know, having reviewed the activities in my constituency, is how you will be looking at a strategic overview that brings together the activities of all of the different agencies that impact upon this, not sometime next year, but before the real issues that are about to hit every single constituency around the coast of this country right now.
I'm very sorry for the Year 2 pupils at the school that she's referring to in her constituency. I would respectfully remind her that she represents a party that sat back and did nothing for 14 years, while the levels of pollution in our rivers, lakes and seas got far, far worse. And that, I venture to suggest, is why those Year 2 pupils can't go in the water.
Perrin Moon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Sewage polluting Cornish beaches, as we've heard, such as mine in Camborne and Redruth, and specifically in St Agnes, the location of the head office for Surfers Against Sewage, Perranporth and Portreath, has been yet another Conservative scandal damaging our economy and society for years that a Labour government is going to have to clear up. Yeah. Does the Minister agree with me that as well as the economic damage, the damage to mental health of those of us that cannot regularly use the sea should not be underestimated? And will the Commission consider the mental health benefits as part of its work?
Yeah. I thank my honourable friend, and of course I had the pleasure of visiting his constituency during the summer with him as well, and I saw for myself the impact of sewage in the seas, in the beautiful beaches around his part of Cornwall. Of course, it's not unusual for a Labour government to come in and have to clean up the Tories' mess, but rarely quite so literally as in the case of sewage in our waterways. I think he makes a very important point about mental health. I hope he will feed that into the Commission, because it's very important they hear all sorts of views about the impact of polluted water as they consider how we can best clean it up.
David Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since being elected in July, Exmouth and Exeter East has been hit by significant sewage issues, and I'm sure the Secretary of State will understand that, and I've written to him recently outlining some of these issues. Although the Commission may bear fruit in future years, there are areas of the country, such as my constituency, that need immediate fixes. Will the Secretary of State please meet with me and the CEO for South West Water to ensure that immediate fixes are being put in and that maximum pressure is applied so that we see the fixes we need, so that we don't endure the summer we've just had?
Well, I welcome him to his place and to this House, and I hope that members on that side of the House will engage constructively with the Commission as well, so that he can feed his views directly, and my honourable friend, the Minister for Water, is happy to meet with him to discuss his local issues.
Josh Frederick-Glynn.
Deputy Speaker. In Calder Valley, my constituents do not think Yorkshire Water are doing a good job. Last year, sewage was discharged into the River Calder 4,125 times. The same year, Nicholas Shaw, the boss, chose to take home a 371,000 bonus, or £90 per discharge, if you will. In Calder Valley, we've also had 3 major flooding incidents in the past 15 years, and regulation doesn't cover water companies acting against flooding. Will my honourable friend look at the breadth of the current regulation and what water companies can do in regard to flooding? Thank you.
Well, he makes a very important point, and the Water Special Measures Bill, which is currently going through the House of Lords and will soon be in this House too, is looking at how those undeserved bonuses can be banned because of the sense of injustice that the public quite rightly feel that failure should be rewarded when clearly it shouldn't. The points he makes about flooding are well made. I hope he will feed those in to the work of the Commission as it continues its work.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
It used to be the case that the Environment Agency was responsible for monitoring sewage discharges, but for over a decade now, water companies have had that responsibility for monitoring releases via storm overflows. In the last Parliament, the Environmental Audit Commission heard that illegal spills may have been 10 times greater than water companies declared. Will the new Commission consider removing from water companies the monitoring of sewage discharges, or will he let them mark their own homework, as the last government did?
Well said.
There's been a wide failure of regulation of water. That's why I've asked Sir John Cunliffe, as part of the commission that he's leading, to look at regulation and the roles of the regulators, not just one of them, to ensure that we have a system that is fit for purpose. We are ensuring outside the commission that all overflows, including emergency overflows, there is mandatory monitoring of what is coming out of them. And in the Water Special Measures Bill, water chief executives will be required to be open and transparent about the extent of pollution. Otherwise, they will face personal criminal liability for the first time.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In 2024 alone, Hartlepool's beautiful coastline has been marred by 49 separate incidents of sewage being discharged into our sea. At the same time, these water companies are making billions in profit. Can I ask the Secretary of State, whatever the outcome of the Commission, can he commit to put people in Hartlepool and across the country ahead of profit in cleaning up this mess? Yeah.
Well, he's absolutely right, of course. This sewage scandal affects the entire country, including his constituents in Hartlepool. It is important that this commission focuses on ensuring that consumers and the environment come first, and that we have a water sector that serves their interests primarily. I hope he will make his points directly to the commission, because they will value hearing from him.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was a brand new parent when South East Water cut off the water for 6 days for myself and for thousands of my constituents. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, South East Water is 74% in debt. It's the second most indebted company in the land. Now, their current investment plans rely on taking on more debt, which is then paid for through increased customers' bills. Clearly, this is unsustainable, not just for the companies, but also for ever-rising customers' bills. So can he assure me that this commission will make suggestions for reducing the indebtedness of water companies?
Again, an important point, and the Commission will be looking at the financial viability of water companies, including their levels of indebtedness. He made an important point there as well about what happens when water companies cut off supplies, because frankly compensation to individual households and indeed to businesses has been inadequate. That is something we seek to address through the Water Special Measures Bill, which is going through Parliament right now. It needn't wait for the Commission.
Alison Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's okay. The village of Upper Tean, which the Secretary of State may remember, it has experienced flooding, burst drains, sewage flooding into our rivers and streams, killing them for over many years, and recently had to turn out in the middle of the night en masse to divert traffic away when the village was overwhelmed with quite a serious and urgent flood. Following meetings with the Environment Agency, the Parish Council are looking to develop a flood action group so that they can provide the resilience and the powerful voice to take action against water companies such as Severn Trent. Will the Secretary of State assure me that the Commission will look at how communities such as Upper Tean can build the resilience that they need and help them develop such a flood action group?
I remember very well the visit that she is referring to, and I remember it with pleasure, but of course I remember how distressed residents were to see their homes flooded, their possessions destroyed, and very often their homes uninsurable because of where they were located. The Commission will be looking at all of these factors. My honourable friend, the Minister for Water, and I are also looking at what can be done separately to tackle the scourge of flooding and how we can better protect communities now and into the future.
I'm going to try and get as many people as I can in, so can we just keep the questions and answers as snappy as we can, please? Jessica Brown.
Thank you very Deputy Speaker, the statement from the Secretary of State is welcomed, but passionate campaigners in my constituency will be concerned that a review, when we already know the dire states of our rivers and watercourses, will potentially push the can down the road and delay the changes that we so desperately need. Will the Commission set a deadline by which water companies have to prevent all sewage discharges in sensitive sites, including chalk streams such as the River Lavant and the Ems in my constituency?
We certainly know the dire state of our waterways. We need, though, to know in detail the root and branch reforms required to correct it. We will have that from this Commission by next summer. I hope she will take part in that. And, of course, we need to clean up all of our waterways, including those very important ones she refers to.
Rachel Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This weekend I met with the Philongli Flood Action Group, a small group of brave men and women who, when they receive notifications about floods, put their waders on in the middle of the night and go out and clear a culvert that is not fit for purpose. Will the Secretary of State join me in applauding their efforts, but also reassure them that this Commission will look across all departments at how we can best make sure that those culverts can accommodate the overflow from things like our smart motorways, because they're telling me that their floods have got worse since the M6 was allowed to become a smart motorway, and also looking at the economic impact of those villages when shops, hairdressers and the local pubs close, some of them on a permanent basis.
Well, I thank her for her question, and of course I thank her residents and those indeed in other members' constituencies who are taking action for themselves against flooding. We've already set up and have held the first meeting of the new Flood Resilience Task Force that will be seeking to provide better coordination between central government where the resources are held and those local agencies on the ground charged with improving work to protect people from the very, very damaging effects of serious flooding.
Joshua Reynolds.
Deputy Speaker, last year water company bosses in England and Wales were paid £9.1 million in bonuses. This is whilst Thames Water proposed a 59% increase in customer bills by 2030. So does the Secretary of State therefore understand why many residents in our constituencies have lost faith in the regulator's ability to control these powerful firms, and will he commit to replace the regulator with one that's actually got some teeth?
I certainly agree with him that residents have lost confidence not just in the regulators but in the water system at large, which is why we've set up this commission to look at how we can get regulation that is fit for purpose for the future.
Catherine Fuchs.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and diolch, Secretary of State. I must be one of the only constituencies in the UK of Monmouthshire that didn't get a visit from the Secretary of State during the I did get a visit from Fergal Sharkey, so that's great. I really welcome the announcement today, Secretary of State, especially this new partnership between the Welsh and the UK government. That unfortunately, the side opposite completely failed to do. For example, they brought out the River Wye Action Plan, which failed to include Wales and had no new money. And so can I ask the Secretary of State for Wales if he will re-look at the River Wye Action Plan, commit to a new one that uses the River Wye catchment partnership groups, the Friends of the River Wye, and all the different civil servants from both sides of the border in England and Wales are on that group. So let's use that group and let's help clean up the River Wye.
Well, diolch yn fawr I chi. I'd be very happy, of course, to visit Monmouthshire. It's very important we look at the situation with water across catchments, particularly with those are crossing borders between England and Wales, and the fact that this commission is jointly commissioned by both governments and will report to both governments will ensure that's what happens.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to see action coming forward from the government on this, but we know they need to go further and faster on this issue. In North Norfolk, much of the infrastructure dates from the 1970s and 1980s. Then a just about managing approach was taken to construction, and clearly it's no longer managing. Can the Minister confirm that this Commission will look at specifically directing investment from water companies in the infrastructure upgrades as and where they're needed?
Yeah, well, we certainly need fast action after 14 years of absolutely nothing, and this Commission will point the way to resetting the sector for the future. It will seek to establish a system that will do exactly what he's talking about.
Danny Beale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Hundreds of residents in my constituency in Ryswick Gardens and Ryswick Manor have been flooded in recent weeks. I've met many of them who've had to move out of their homes. They're frustrated about poor regulation and buck passing between the Water Authority and the local council, the Flood Management Authority. This welcome review after 14 years of dither and delay is good news for my residents, but will my right honourable friend assure my residents that the review will specifically look at the adequacy of governance and accountability mechanisms between flood management authorities and water management organisations? And will he meet with me and my constituents to discuss these issues? Thank you.
I had the pleasure of visiting his constituency many times, of course, over the past year, and I know what a concern flooding is to people living in the constituency. We've already set up the Flood Resilience Task Force, which will ensure better coordination between the centre, where resources are held, and those agencies on the front line, including those he refers to ensure that people are better protected against the impact of flooding. And I'm sure my honourable friend, the Water Minister, will be happy to meet with him to talk about the local issues he has concerning flooding.
If we're short and sharp, we can probably wrap this up in the next several minutes with everybody getting in. Jim Shannon, show us how it's done.
Short and sharp. What a challenge, my goodness. This is great news, Minister, thank you very much. That at last accountability is going to be at the heart of this review. With Northern Ireland being in a similar situation, but when it comes to water, but in a slightly different scenario as a government-owned operator, will the Minister indicate how this review can help with a UK-wide water service that is truly fit for purpose? Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to hear from the honourable gentleman. Of course, water is devolved in Northern Ireland. It will be for the local authorities there to take their own decisions about how they address and correct the problems that we see in beauty spots like Lough Neagh.
Dave Richardson.
Oh, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are 21 local government wards that make up my constituency of Lichfield. In just one of them, Baggots and Needwood, they were subjected to 3,000 hours of sewage spills in just 1 year. Can the Secretary of State assure me that after 14 years of failure from the party opposite, this Commission will leave nowhere to hide for criminal water bosses?
Yeah. That is absolutely an intention. Yep.
Phil Brickell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as a whitewater kayaker, I've spent countless hours on rivers and streams up and down the country, and I know that both the Environment Agency and Ofwat need to be properly resourced if we are going to clear up the toxic legacy left by the last government in our waterways. Can the Secretary of State reassure my constituents in Bolton West that today's newly announced Independent Water Commission will look at resourcing to ensure that water firms responsible for polluting our waterways are held to account?
The Commission will be looking at identifying a model of appropriate and effective regulation for precisely the reasons he outlines.
Louise Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents in North East Derbyshire are rightly disgusted that under the previous Conservative government, water bosses received over £41 million in bonuses and other incentives. Can the Secretary of State assure me that every penny of their hard-earned money will be spent where it is needed?
I think we've already announced plans to ring-fence money earmarked for investment so it cannot be diverted for undeserved multi-million-pound bonuses, as happened so frequently under the previous failed Conservative government.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The chalk streams in North East Hertfordshire and across England are of international significance, but too often these waterways are not just polluted, but also often running dry. So will the Secretary of State assure me that this Commission will look at the regulation not only needed to bring an end to sewage spills, but also put an absolute end to the over-abstraction of aquifers and chalk streams?
The Commission has a wide remit and will be looking at the wider impact of damage to the water system that got much worse under the previous government.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
We welcome, as a coastal city, the Commission. It's vital to sort sewage and floods. But in my constituency, Portsmouth North, parts of Drayton and Farlington are affected by floods, not from rivers or seas, but because it pumps up through the James. And whilst this is not sewage, it does cascade down the streets into houses and shops, causing people while they're on holiday having to check whether they've got to get people to put sandbags out to protect it. Will the Minister ensure that these types of floods are included in the Commission and responsibility is taken by water companies?
Yeah. Well, we've also set up the Flood Resilience Task Force, which is looking precisely at those kind of problems related to flooding so that we can take action immediately.
Luke Charters.
Speaker, toothless water regulators have been left up the creek. Can the Secretary of State confirm that Sir John Cunliffe will look at scrapping and replacing Ofwat?
It will be for the Commission to look at how we get to an effective and appropriate model of regulation, including the roles of the regulators themselves.
Colin Naismith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The River Weaver, which runs through the town of Nantwich in my constituency, suffered a spate of devastating pollution last year, killing hundreds of fish and representing a blight on our beautiful market town. It is believed that the cause of the pollution was slurry dumping from intense agriculture. So can the Secretary of State confirm that the engagement and support that farmers need to dispose of slurry mix in the appropriate way will form part of the review?
Yes, the impact of runoff from agriculture will be in scope for the Commission's work.
And finally, John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that if the party opposite had put as much energy into protecting our rivers, lakes and seas as they have to filling their reservoirs of chutzpah, then my constituents in Rugby wouldn't be living with the consequences of ineffective regulation, of undue profits, of unearned bonuses, and that it's this party that isn't, as in so many other areas, is clearing up the mess that we inherited.
Yeah.
Short answer to that is yes.
Thank you so much. Before I call the Home Secretary for the statement, I should inform the House that the inquest into the death of Chris Carver has been opened and adjourned. So the matter is therefore technically still before the court. However, Mr. Speaker has granted a waiver in relation to the House's resolution on matters sub judice, so that members may refer to it in the House's proceedings. And I call the Home Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to update the House on Monday's verdict in the trial of Sergeant Martin Blake, on the accountability review into police use of force and on confidence in policing. Chris Carver was killed in Streatham 2 years ago. His parents and family, of course, continue to experience deep grief and distress. A year ago, Sergeant Martin Blake was charged with murder, and on Monday, the jury returned their verdict, and Sergeant Blake was acquitted. It is imperative that the jury's verdict is respected, and that Sergeant Blake and his family are given the time and space that they will need to recover from what will have been an immensely difficult experience for them during both the investigation and the trial. For an armed police officer to be prosecuted for actions taken in the course of their duties is very rare, so of course this case has raised considerable concerns for the public and the police. The decisions made on any individual case, be it by the police, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, the Crown Prosecution Service, the courts or the jury, are rightly independent of the government. So it would not be right for me to comment further on the details in this case. But this case has happened against a backdrop of wider and long-standing concerns about accountability, standards and confidence. A backdrop in which police officers and forces have raised long-standing concerns about the way in which the accountability system currently operates, particularly in cases of specialist policing like firearms and driving, where we ask officers to do incredibly difficult and dangerous jobs to keep us safe. and a backdrop of fallen community confidence in policing and the criminal justice system across the country, with, as the Metropolitan Police Commissioner has said this week, lower confidence among black communities. Madam Deputy Speaker, the British policing model relies on mutual bonds of trust between the public and the police. For our policing model to work, it is essential that the police have the confidence of the communities they serve, and that officers have the confidence they need to do their vital and often extremely difficult job of keeping us all safe. Too often in recent times, both elements of that confidence have become frayed, and this government has made it a mission to put confidence back into policing. So as part of that work, I want to update the House on new measures that we will take forward in response to the accountability review and following ongoing work to respond to issues raised by the previous Angelini and Casey reviews. A package of reforms to rebuild confidence for police officers and for communities, to tackle the unacceptable delays and confusion in the system, ensuring the complexity of specialist operations is considered at an early stage, and ensuring that the highest standards are upheld and maintained. 12 months ago, the previous government launched a review into the accountability systems for police use of force and police driving. The previous Home Secretary set out an interim response in March, which the Labour Party supported, and I welcome the work that my predecessor did. The review was not completed by the election, and whilst we have continued to draw on evidence from police and civil society organisations, we were unable to say more publicly in the run-up to the trial. So today I want to update the House. The accountability review found that the current system for holding police officers to account is not commanding the confidence of either the public or the police. Accountability and misconduct proceedings are too often plagued by delays stretching for years, which are damaging for complainants, officers and forces alike. And the system has become much more complex, with confusion over multiple thresholds for different investigations, a lack of clarity, especially involving specialist capabilities. There are also wider concerns about the misconduct system, because the focus when things go wrong can end up being entirely on the decisions of the individual officer, so system failings like poor training, unmanageable caseloads or wider force practices are not sufficiently considered or followed up, so too little changes. And at the same time, we saw, following the Casey and Angelini reviews, in cases where someone is not fit to be a police officer, it is too hard for forces to remove them, and communities feel that no one is held to account. So the public must be able to expect that where officers exceed the lawful use of their powers or fail to meet proper standards, there will be rapid and robust processes in place to hold them to account. And police officers who act with integrity and bravery to keep us safe each day need to know they have strong public support. Because if officers lack the confidence to use their powers following their training and the law, then public safety is put at risk. So let me turn to the policy measures. First, we will take forward the 3 measures proposed by the previous government in March to strengthen and speed up the system. We will align the threshold for the referral of police officers from the Independent Office of Police Conduct to the Crown Prosecution Service to that used by the police when referring cases involving members of the public. Currently, that threshold is lower for police officers, and that is not justified. We will allow the IOPC to send cases to the CPS where there is sufficient evidence to do so, instead of having to wait for a final investigation report. And we will put the IOPC victims' right to review policy on a statutory footing to ensure there's an appeal mechanism for bereaved families when a decision is made not to seek a charging decision. And then we will go further. When officers act in the most dangerous situations on behalf of the state, it is vital that those officers and their families are not put in further danger during any subsequent legal proceedings. So we will therefore introduce a presumption of anonymity for firearms officers subject to criminal trial following a police shooting in the course of their professional duties up to the point of conviction. We will also ensure that the highly specialist nature of particular policing tactics and tools are reflected in relevant investigative guidance. That includes ensuring that in investigations of police driving incidents, evidence from subject matter experts and in-car video footage is considered at the earliest possible opportunity, and that more widely, and officers' compliance with their training and guidance is appropriately taken into account in investigative decision-making. I've also established a rapid review of 2 specific areas where recent legal judgments have now meant we have different thresholds for criminal misconduct and inquest investigations, adding complexity, confusion and delay to the system. In particular, it will look at the legal test for use of force in misconduct proceedings and the threshold for determining short-form findings of unlawful killing in inquests. The independent review will be conducted by Tim Godwin and the Right Honourable Sir Adrian Fulford and will report jointly to myself and to the Lord Chancellor by the end of January. And I've asked for further work to be done on timeliness standards and misconduct procedures as part of our wider policing reforms. My Right Honourable friend, the Attorney-General, has also invited the Director of Public Prosecutions to examine the CPS guidance and processes in relation to charging police officers for offences committed in the course of their duties. And following calls from civil society organisations, we will ask the College of Policing to establish a national lessons learned database for deaths or serious injuries arising from police contact or police pursuits. So there is a responsibility to ensure that lessons are incorporated into the development of police training and guidance when tragic incidents occur and to prevent the repetition of such events in future. And to rebuild wider public confidence in the wider standard regimes for policing, we also need to ensure that there is faster progress in responding to the findings of the Angelini and Casey reviews on vetting and standards. So we will therefore take forward in this parliamentary session some previously agreed proposals to ensure that officers convicted of certain criminal offences are automatically found to have committed gross misconduct and create a presumption of dismissal where gross misconduct is found. We will change regulations to enable Chief Constables to promptly dismiss officers who fail their vetting, which has been a glaring gap in the system for too long. And we will go further to ensure standards are upheld. We will ensure statutory underpinning for national vetting standards and strengthen requirements relating to the suspension of officers under investigation for domestic abuse or sexual offences. Finally, we need to ensure that there are wider measures to restore confidence in policing and the criminal justice system across all communities. That must include further work to take forward the Met's London Race Action Plan, where action has already been taken, but where the Met Commissioner and Mayor for London have both made clear there is much more work to do. And we need to see progress from the National Police Chiefs Council on the National Police Race Action Plan. And Madam Deputy Speaker, this government is also determined to take forward further measures ranging from the introduction of neighbourhood policing to new police force performance standards to strengthen confidence in every community across the country. The measures I've outlined are practical steps to rebuild confidence, tackle delays, provide clarity and ensure high standards are maintained. For more than 200 years, policing by consent has been the bedrock of British policing, and this government is determined to take the action necessary today, both to strengthen the confidence the public have in the police and to strengthen the confidence the police must have when they are out on the street each day doing the difficult job of keeping us all safe. Those are the twin goals we must all work towards, and I commend this statement to the House.
I'll call the Shadow Home Secretary, Mr James Cleverly.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I also thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement and for the recent Privy Council briefing that I received from her. I'll start off by saying I very much welcome what she's put forward today. I agree with almost all of it and disagree with almost none of it. Because as a society, we demand that our firearms officers put themselves in dangerous and difficult situations to protect others. Every firearms officer in the UK is a volunteer, and we rightly value the fact that we have a predominantly unarmed police force here in the UK, but we do of course need a cadre of armed police officers across the country. I've had the privilege of visiting the Police Firearms Training Centre in Gravesend, and I have seen firsthand just how rigorous that firearms training regime is, not just in marksmanship, but also in the use of judgment. Split-second, life or death decisions have to be made, often in circumstances where the risk picture is incomplete, and often in circumstances where the cost of not acting is considerably more severe than the cost of acting. And in all of the debate and conversation we have around the police use of force, this fundamental truth should be in the forefront of our minds. As the Right Honourable Lady has said, we rightly expect that all officers at all times act with restraint and professionalism. But we cannot allow circumstances to be created where officers are disincentivised from being decisive or become unwilling to take the right action for fear of trial by media or for fear of a long period of suspension under investigation. When my party was in government, and I am grateful for the Home Secretary acknowledging this in her statement, we started under my predecessors and led predominantly by my right honourable friend, the member for Croydon South. We initiated a review into the use of force by police officers and the accountability regime. I am very grateful, genuinely grateful, that under her leadership that is continuing. Because as she rightly says, giving confidence to police officers so that they can act in accordance with their training, but that they will not be penalised for taking those actions is absolutely key. And ensuring simultaneously that the public have confidence that police officers still have an appropriate accountability framework is equally as important. And she made the point that both of those aims are being pursued in the accountability review that she is taking forward. And the commitment that these investigations will be done more speedily is key. And specifically, that she will continue with our proposals to allow the IOPC to refer cases to the CPS earlier is important, because prolonged periods of uncertainty undermines the confidence both of police officers and the public that they serve. And I am very much pleased to see the government is continuing in our reforms to ensure that when police officers act in accordance with their training and in the line of duty, that the presumption is that they will not be held to a lower threshold for prosecutions than members of the general public. And I would ask her to seriously consider that training in these roles forms a legitimate part of the defence of officers if and when criminal prosecutions are brought forward. And I'm particularly pleased, and I very much welcome the additional move to introduce the presumption of anonymity for firearms officers subject to criminal trial following a shooting. We now know that Chris Cabba was involved with a violent gang, and that Sergeant Blake and his family had, and indeed still have, a well-founded fear of violent reprisals. And that fear was amplified when Sergeant Blake's name was put in the public domain. Can I ask the Right Honourable Lady, in light of the review by Dr. Gillian Fairfield, which further of her recommendations she is minded to take forward? And will she recognise, in the era of social media, that all people of public profile, including members of this House, should be very thoughtful and careful about making public statements when facts are unknown or contested? Because the police should know instinctively that they will have the backing of both their chain of command and and politicians involved in their governance at all levels when they do the right thing at our behest, and they will be backed by their chain of command even if those actions are not popular or convenient, because we have seen too often police leadership bend to inappropriate levels of public pressure. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome this statement from the Home Secretary today and her commitment to take forward the reforms of the Police Accountability Review, and we will, of course, on this side of the House, my benches, we will work constructively with her to ensure the appropriate balance is struck to reinforce confidence in policing and of policing. Thank you.
Home Secretary.
Can I thank the Shadow Home Secretary for his response? And this is an area where I hope there will actually be wide agreement across all sides of the House on the importance of these issues, the fact that it does go to the heart of that British tradition of policing by consent, where all of us want to know that, of course, there is proper accountability in place for decisions that police forces and police officers make, but we also have to know that the police have the confidence to take sometimes the most difficult decisions of all in order to keep the rest of us safe. And he is right that firearms officers really do have to deal with some of the most difficult parts of policing of all, sometimes having to make split-second decisions in the most fast-moving and difficult circumstances that none of us would want to be in. And frankly, if any of us were in those situations, we would want to know that there were firearms police officers there to be able to protect us and to be able to support us. Firearms in the UK discharged by police officers is actually very rare. It's very low compared particularly to other countries. That reflects the nature of our unarmed policing tradition, but also their professionalism and training and the different ways in which they manage often very difficult situations. But of course they need to know that where they are following their training, operating within the law, that they have our support in the difficult decisions that they have to take, and they don't find that their lives are upturned as a result. The anonymity provisions, I think, are very important, and I hope we'll have support from the whole House, and we want to bring those in, the presumption of anonymity. We would like to bring those in as part of the forthcoming crime and policing bill. He also raised the issue of training. And as I particularly raised, I want the issue training to be looked at as part of the updating of the investigative guidance, where it needs to clearly can be addressed relatively quickly to ensure that issues, for example, around police driving, but also more widely use of training in other areas as well, is taken into account as part of those early investigative decisions before cases pursue through the process as well. On the Fairfield review, we are taking forward further measures, and particularly we'll be looking at the way in which the IOPC it needs to work as part of the wider policing reform. It's really important we continue to have an independent process in place. But I think this also has to fall against a backdrop of the wider reforms that we need to do with policing to make sure that we can strengthen confidence both for officers and for communities, because that is how we will maintain that proud British policing tradition of policing by consent for the new generation.
Mother of the House, Diane Abbott.
First of all, I'd like to express my sympathy for Chris Cabber's family and his mother. Because whatever he was or did, he was her son, and she deserves our sympathy and respect. I would also like to acknowledge my colleague, the member for Clapham and Brixton Hill, who's worked hard to support the family in challenging circumstances. In the past few days, there has been an avalanche of information about Chris Cabber. But to those who are asking why this information was not made available to the jury, that was the decision of the judge, and they should put their complaints to the judge. The Home Secretary will know that over the years there's been a series of deaths at the hands of the Metropolitan Police. They have led to deep unhappiness and even riots. One death that comes to mind is that in 1985 of Cynthia Jarrett, who died of a heart attack when 4 policemen burst into her house. Her death triggered the Broadwater Farm riots. So does the Home Secretary accept that nothing could be more damaging for police-community relations than if the idea took hold that in some way the police were above the law?
Can I thank my right honourable friend for the points that she has made. I know that these are issues that she has long experience in working on and addressing through many years, and how important she sees this as. And she is right to raise concerns that are felt around incidents where lives are lost, and to recognise the distress that will be felt by Chris Cabba's mother, by his family. And I also recognise my honourable friend, the member for Clapham and Brixton Hills, work to support the family in difficult circumstances. She makes an important point about that these decisions at every stage in the process have to be about those for the independent judiciary, for the courts, for the police prosecutors, and that our role in this House is to provide the framework within which those decisions are then made individually. But I also agree with her that ultimately at the heart, all these measures have to have the confidence of communities across London and of communities across the country, because if they don't, then that proud British tradition of policing by consent is lost, and that is deeply damaging for police officers and for policing, as well as for all of our public safety. Liberal Democrat spokesperson Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I also thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement. Any case in which a young person's life is cut short is a tragedy, and my thoughts are with all of those who are impacted by this awful situation. It is crucial that we in this place respect the judiciary and their right to make decisions without political interference. However, a case like this does not happen in a vacuum, and we must remember the wider context. As Baroness Casey said in her review, Black Londoners are underprotected and over-policed. A huge and radical step is required to regain police legitimacy and trust among London's black communities. These findings cannot and should not be ignored. That means working together to rebuild community relationships and trust in the police, something that is vital to the very fabric of policing by consent. And with that in mind, I welcome the Home Secretary's commitment to pick up the accountability review. And when it comes to firearms officers' accountability when operating under enormous pressure, ambiguity benefits nobody, not police officers and certainly not our communities. I would, however, welcome more details from the Home Secretary about how those communities with the least trust in the police, especially ethnic minority communities, will be consulted in this review. And these questions extend past the Met, Madam Deputy Speaker. So will other police forces, including my own Greater Manchester Police, be involved in the review? And will the Home Secretary commit to commissioning an independent review on the implementation of the Casey Review's recommendations? Because rebuilding trust in the police has got to be our priority. It's for the sake of our whole community, and for ethnic minority communities, and also for the officers who are working hard to keep us safe in difficult circumstances. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for the important points that she makes. She's right that lack of clarity, the uncertainty, and I think also the long delays, the damaging delays that we've had in the system benefit no one. But she's also right to say that the part of the sensitivity for this case, but part of the backdrop, the long-standing backdrop, has been the much lower confidence in policing among Black Londoners, the different levels of confidence around race. It's why that was highlighted as part of the Casey Review, and why the Met Police have set out a race action plan, but where both the Met Commissioner and the Mayor of London have been clear that there is significant additional work to do, because any measures, if they don't have the confidence of all communities that the police serve, in the end undermine those crucial principles around policing by consent. So we are continuing to work to ensure that the measures, some of the measures recommended by the Casey Review that have national implications, and the Angelini Review as well, are also being taken forward report as part of this package, and that includes issues around vetting and misconduct processes. It's really important that we make progress on those measures, as well as some of the issues that arise around accountability review, and we will also make sure that all communities are involved in the way in which measures are taken forward.
Bell Rabira Addy.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Home Secretary for her statement that fatal shooting of Chris Carver caused pain to his family and considerable fear and anger, not only in my community, but across London. And this House must understand that the concerns being raised are not anti-police, but pro-accountability. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must respect our legal processes, and it's extremely rare that police officers ever face such prosecution. The Home Secretary clearly agrees that whilst police officers work under exceptional pressures, that any loss of life following police contact must be properly investigated. So is she concerned by comments from the Metropolitan Police Commissioner regarding disciplinary processes, including that firearms officers should be exempt from criminal charges over fatal shootings? This would do nothing to rebuild broken trust and confidence, particularly within the black community, who have been disproportionately impacted. Following the Angelini and Casey reviews, is less accountability really the route that the head of the Met should be asking for?
Well, I thank the honourable member for her question. I know, as I said, she has worked really hard to represent her communities, and it's clear that there has to be a proper framework for legal accountability for police forces, for individual officers. There must always be investigations where there is loss of life following police contact. That's always appropriate. We do want to see investigations take place much more swiftly. But I would also say that all of the police chiefs that I have talked to as part of the work on this, I think all feel very strongly that there has to be a clear accountability system in place, and also one that makes sure that it provides confidence both for communities and for police officers who are making difficult decisions in the line of the duty. And I think both police and Parliament and the public would recognise you have to do both of those things, have the confidence of communities and the confidence of police officers to do their job.
Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement and for advance sight of the statement. What she's announced is welcome, and but clearly many of these measures will take time to introduce. So could I ask her what she's doing in the meantime to ensure that there is confidence throughout the system, and also if she can ensure the Home Affairs Select Committee is kept updated of progress in making sure these changes, welcome changes, are made?
The Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee for those important points. We are working at pace. We obviously plan legislation we have set out in the King's Speech, the Crime and Policing Bill, and there are a series of areas where we believe these measures can be taken forward as part of that process. We will also have some areas that we may be able to make progress through regulations, and other areas which are simply about changing the guidance. And we have set out some timetables as part of the briefing that will be made public, and that people will be able to find on the Home Office website to be able to get more detail on the individual measures. And I will certainly ensure this afternoon that all of those details are sent to the Home Affairs Committee.
Florence Eshelemi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for her statement this morning. And I also want to commend my friend, the member for Clapham and Brixton Hill. Shortly after the tragic shooting, she organised a meeting with the family of Chris Carver. And no matter what we think about an individual, we have to remember that for any parent to bury their child is really tragic. And when I met Prosper and Helen, the pain in their eyes in what had happened will not leave me. And I also want to pay tribute to our officers across Lambeth and Southwark who work very hard with our community in building that community relations. And often we find ourselves in our borough with police from outside of the borough coming in to cause some of the issues, but those police officers work very hard who know our patch. So just on that, I want to ask the Home Secretary, she mentioned that this issue isn't on a backdrop. It's on a backdrop of longer-standing concerns on accountability. Does she agree, following the cases review, in terms of making sure that the issue around institutional racism, that she will continue to hold the Met Police to account on their progress on the Race Action Plan?
My honourable friend makes a really important point about we need to see progress around the Met Police Race Action Plan that responds to serious findings, very serious findings in the Casey review. There are wider issues that the Casey review raised as well, but it is essential that that action is taken. I know that both the Mayor and the Met Commissioner have made strong commitments to ensure that progress continues to be made, and I know that London MPs will also want to see that action taken. We cannot have reports just take place and then not have the follow-up for them.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and very much like to welcome the Home Secretary's statement. There is a lot of concern in my constituency about the fact that Sergeant Blake was prosecuted in the first place, and we are also conscious of the amazing work that our wonderful police are doing for us to keep us safe every single day. Would the Home Secretary set out in more detail what additional protections are going to be there to ensure that our police are protected as they go about their job protecting us?
I thank the honourable member for his question. So the reforms that we've set out following this wide examination of the different evidence will mean that where there are investigations, and there will need to be investigations in individual cases, that they can happen much more speedily, and also that the threshold is no longer lower for referring cases from the Independent Office of Police Conduct to the CPS than it is currently for members of the public when they are investigated for a crime, because I think that is not justified, it is not appropriate, and it's right that that threshold should be brought back in line. We also want to make sure that issues around training, issues around the specialist capabilities are taken account at a very early stage in investigations, and that is why we'll be revising the guidance for investigations to make sure that that happens. And the Attorney General has asked the Director for Public Prosecutions to review CPS guidance on charging in cases where officers use force in the line of duty in those cases, as I referred to earlier in the statement. So a series of areas where we are making sure that the system can work more effectively, but this is crucially, this is about raising confidence for the public as well as about raising confidence for police officers.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for her statement. I'd also like to send my condolences to the family, friends and loved ones of Chris Caber, particularly this week while the media are using racist gang tropes to justify the killing of Chris Caber. 1,900 people have died in police custody since 1990. 1990, and I would say that the police do have protections. You know, we know that our black communities are over-policed and under-supported, so can the Home Secretary give us assurances that we and our communities are kept safe and that extra protections are not given to the police because they already have the protections they need?
Well, I set out to my honourable friend, I think the framework that I set out is about ensuring that there is a proper system for accountability for police forces and for police officers, which I think all police officers will support and think is immensely important in the way in which they use their powers. But it also we have to tackle the huge long delays in the system. We have to tackle the complexity in the system, the different thresholds that take place, the fact that there are real concerns, that specialist capabilities and certainly areas around both driving and firearms are just not taken into account at an early stage in the investigations, and that can end up with serious problems much later on, which mean that firearms officers or other police officers feel like they don't have the confidence or clarity about their responsibilities and the way in which they can use their powers, but equally so that communities don't feel that they are being let down because they don't have timely investigations and conclusions and answers to their concerns.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Sergeant Blake has gone through 2 years of a living hell for simply doing his duty and keeping the British public safe. So will the Home Secretary join us at Reform UK in commending his bravery to send out a clear message to all our brave police officers that this place has their backs.
Police officers who do immensely difficult work right across the country every day to keep us safe deserve our strong support, often in the most difficult circumstances of huge bravery. It's why I have attended the Police Bravery Awards every year for 14 years to recognise and support the work that police officers do, often in the most difficult of circumstances. I think those officers all believe that it's really important that we have a system where communities can feel confident in the work that police officers do, and also that they, as officers, can continue to do that work to keep us safe every single day.
Home Affairs Select Committee member Sean Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I pay tribute to the majority of police officers who go to work and do a decent job, and often it's police officers themselves are as disgusted as the general public when there is misconduct taking place within police forces. Does anyone from the Home Secretary agree with me, though, that there is a connection between the delays with police investigations, delays in the criminal justice system, and then delays in misconduct hearings? And these things have to be taken in the round. In my community, we have the case of Darian Atkinson, who was killed by a police officer who is now serving time in prison after the use of a taser. Will the review also look at the use of tasers as well in the work of the review?
Well, one of the points that we want the College of Policing to do is to be able to set up the lessons learned database to make sure that there is actually action that is taken, for example, when there are deaths or serious injuries following police contact. Because too often, even when those cases are investigated and reforms or measures and recommendations are made, too often those are not followed up, they are not actually implemented, and as a result, bereaved families can feel badly let down. So it's really important that we have both a clear framework around standards, but also to make sure that when things do go wrong, there is actually a proper system in place to ensure that lessons are learned and things can be improved for the future.
So, Judy Lewis.
I'm sure most fair-minded people will feel that the Home Secretary has got the balance exactly right, particularly as she's now brought in this presumption of anonymity. But can I draw her attention to a surprisingly detailed report by the court correspondent of the Evening Standard, who seems to have had access to police intelligence reports about a £10,000 reward being offered by gangs to be able to identify and presumably wreak reprisals against the sergeant concerned. What's concerning to me is that a Metropolitan Police spokesman says this was investigative and protective measures taken. The investigation is now closed. I would have thought that if there were intelligence indicating that a hit was being arranged, the investigation should not be closed until the perpetrators were themselves arrested.
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for that question, because it's clearly important that police officers who do find themselves facing threats or risks as a result of the job that they do, as a result of the difficult situations that they find themselves into because of their work to keep us safe, it's really important that those police officers have strong protection and support. He will know that I cannot comment on an individual case and certainly not on an individual investigation. Those are rightly independent operational decisions for police forces. But I think more widely, everyone will want to make sure that officers who do difficult jobs do have the support they need.
Home Affairs Select Committee member Jake Richards.
Chair, the balance between ensuring that our police have the powers and the tools they need to keep our streets safe, but also ensuring that they are not above the law, is a delicate one. And in that light, I welcome the Home Secretary's statement and indeed the response from the Shadow Home Secretary. Does the Home Secretary agree with me, however, that some of the comments yesterday on the media, and indeed from members of the House, such as the Right Honourable Member for Newark, are unhelpful? Because, in fact, we need to consider all the evidence carefully, in a constructive and calm way when considering this really important issue, and not rush to conclusions on the back of media reports.
Well, My honourable friend makes an important point. There's it's important British tradition that we have in our respect for the rule of law, which is that individual decisions are made by the police, by prosecutors, by the courts, by juries, independently of anything that the government does, independently of anything that politicians do or say. We do all operate within legal frameworks, as Madam Deputy Speaker reminded us at the beginning of this debate, and I'm sure all of us would want to respect that, but also to support all of those independent institutions in the complex and challenging work they do. We can set the framework, but they have to take the individual decisions.
Josh Barrowinday.
Madam Deputy Speaker, when I first started my work supporting young people in London out of crime and gangs, it was the case that 75% of violent crime in London was committed by people aged under 30, and they were 4 times more likely to be victims of crime themselves. In order for the police to help get on top of this, there must be restored confidence between young people and the police, which has been so eroded in recent years. But we must also invest in community policing as well, so cut by the last government. What will the Home Secretary do to rectify those things and give young people the trust in the police that they need and deserve?
Remember, it's a really important point, because when we talk sometimes about trust and confidence for communities, very often it can be young people who can often be those who have the most contact with the police who feel left out of those discussions about community confidence. It's really important that they also have confidence in the police to keep them safe. And I think restoring neighbourhood policing, having those community police officers back in communities who know the local area, who young people can also get to know, is one of the most important and powerful ways to rebuild that trust and to make sure that everybody can have the confidence. That's also how you prevent crime and damage in communities too.
Mike Tapp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Remaining anonymous until conviction is important. I fully back this statement. As the Home Secretary will know, it's not just officers facing trial, but also their families that have to go through the intimidation and threats. Justice is, of course, essential, as is protecting our brave officers. Will the Home Secretary join me in acknowledging the huge toll that these policing roles can take, not just on officers, but also on their families?
I agree with my honourable friend. It's families who often can face some of the most challenging burdens and pressures, and often when you hear from police officers, it's their concern about the impact on their families does affect them very strongly, and that's why I think this presumption of anonymity to the point of conviction is really important to support families as well as officers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And firstly, I want to put on record my support and gratitude to all our frontline police officers in the firearms departments for the difficult, challenging and high-pressure work that they do, including Sergeant Blake and, of course, his family. Now, there's much to commend, Home Secretary, in your statement, and I welcome it. In particular, the anonymity for officers facing investigation, and also that you've got a timeline for this review, which I think is really important to maintain. There are 2 critical words that come up in your statement: confidence and accountability. And I think there's a lot of concern that confidence in the Independent Office for Police Conduct and confidence in the Crown Prosecution Service is falling. In fact, amongst police officers, in particular those in the firearms department, I think confidence, frankly, is collapsing. And that is not a good place to be. And even the jury of the Chris Cabba case wrote a letter to the judge that they wanted read out, that he decided not to read out, where they expressed astonishment and a lack of confidence in the IOPC and the CPS. So here's the accountability point. The accountability is not just on police officers, but also, Home Secretary, on the IOPC and the CPS. Does she still have confidence in the leadership of the IOPC and the CPS, or should that be changed?
Well, the Home Secretary responds. When you use the word you, you're speaking to the Chair. Home Secretary, short and sharp so we can get everybody in.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The accountability review found that the accountability system doesn't currently have confidence for communities or for policing, and that is why we're setting out very practical reforms. It's really important that the work that the CPS, that the IOPC do is done independently of politicians, of police officers and of communities as well, and they have to take decisions within the law and within the framework that Parliament sets, and that's why this review and this announcement is about how we amend that framework so that they can do their jobs.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last Saturday in my constituency in Portsmouth North in Paulsgrove, I held a joint coffee morning with the local police, giving an opportunity for residents to raise concerns directly with officers and to encourage the sign-up to the Portsmouth Police's Let's Talk. It's a platform for sharing information and concerns directly with the public. Does the Home Secretary public confidence in policing is to restore visible local patrols and rebuild the community policing that has been eroded over many years?
I agree with my honourable friend. Restoring or rebuilding confidence around policing and communities means that neighbourhood policing has to be at the heart.
Dr. Kieran Miller.
And I welcome the statement today, much of what the Home Secretary has said. The police officers that we're talking about, including Martin Blake, are often deployed to protect local communities from violent criminal gang members, as he was doing. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that for a local MP to describe one such community violent gang member as a well-loved member of the community, and for the Runnymede Trust to describe a police officer who is subject to a full court hearing and process as unaccountable, actually undermines rather than builds community confidence?
It's really important that we have confidence, the whole confidence of communities in the police and the confidence of police to be able to do their jobs. Decisions on individual cases are rightly those for independent organisations, whether that be for the courts, whether that be for the misconduct process. But those have to operate within a framework, and it's our responsibility to make sure that that framework is right, and it currently isn't right, and that's why we have set out the reforms within which those organisations need to take decisions.
Jonathan Hinder.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I want to thank my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, for her timely and important announcement today. My former colleagues in the police service up and down our country run towards danger on the public's behalf. They pursue dangerous criminals on the public's behalf. And very rarely, as we've heard today, sometimes they have to use lethal force on the public's behalf. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that if our police officers do not have the confidence to do those things, it is the law-abiding public who will ultimately suffer?
Well, my honourable friend's right that in the end, the important issue around confidence and maintaining confidence from everyone, from police, from communities, is that ultimately, if communities don't have confidence, then policing is undermined. But if the police officers don't have confidence, then our public safety is undermined, because it means they can't do their job. And that's why we put confidence at the heart of our mission for safer streets.
Katie Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I too welcome the Home Secretary's statement and plan. Firearms officers are highly skilled specialists, and my constituents are concerned that cases like this one will disincentivise our brave police officers from taking that additional responsibility of carrying firearms. Can the Right Honourable Lady comment on what she is hearing about recruitment and retention of firearms officers, so that we can reassure the public that armed police officers will be available should we need them?
Home Secretary.
The Honourable Member makes an important point, because one of the concerns was being raised as part of the accountability review was concerns around recruitment and retention, especially when people are concerned about the impact on their families. And I think it's that family issue that is so important. But that's why I think issues around the presumption of anonymity to the point of conviction and some of these wider reforms, I hope, will maintain confidence for communities and for police officers.
Lee Pitcher.
Deputy Speaker. An armed robbery was reported at our new formal banking hub last week. I send my thoughts, of course, my warmest thoughts to the staff who endured that terrible event. Will she join me in thanking the officers who responded to the situation, but does she also agree with me that police confidence, that public confidence will grow in policing with more patrols in the future in the neighbourhoods?
I do agree with my honourable friend that people feel more confident if they know who their local police officers are, and that builds that sense of confidence, which also helps prevent crime.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy, can I thank very much the Secretary of State for the statement today and for the confidence that the Secretary of State very clearly is putting in our police officers. We all admire their courage, their bravery and what they do. Policing has devolved for Northern Ireland, as the Home Secretary will know, but the ramifications of this decision could be far-reaching. Last week I had the opportunity to speak to the Chief Constable of the PSNI, and this was one of the conversations that we had. Every police officer in Northern Ireland carries a weapon because of the high levels of threats for terrorism. Their lives are on the line. Every day they are on the beat. That's the life in Northern Ireland for a police officer. So it's very important that we recognise the threats. So has the Secretary of State, or will the Secretary of State perhaps maybe, have those discussions with the Chief Constable in Northern Ireland and also with the Policing and Finance Minister to discuss how these things can go forward to protect our police officers? That's critical. Thank you.
Thank the honourable member for that question, and interesting because some of the issues are very similar or the same around some of the accountability issues for England and Wales and for Northern Ireland. There are some areas where there are some differences which we have looked at and hope will be looked at further as part of the ongoing work and reviews that I have raised. But of course this is all fundamentally about how we make sure that we raise standards and also how we raise confidence and how we include that confidence for both officers and communities across the board.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that the overwhelming majority of police officers are a credit to our communities and our country? In my constituency of Rugby, I have always found that the commitment of senior and rank-and-file officers to protecting the public and taking on criminals is matched by their understanding that they must be held to the highest standards. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that our responsibility as politicians in this House and in our constituencies is to help all involved in achieving both of these important and interlinked objectives?
I do agree with my honourable friend. I think police officers across the country do a totally amazing job, and it's often a really difficult job. They keep us safe. They have to face difficult situations that none of us would want to be in. They also believe in high standards, and it's why so many police officers themselves and police chiefs want to make sure that the system is more effective at being able to root out those who do badly fail standards and who should not be serving in police. And that is something that police officers want in order to be able to maintain high standards. But they also want to know that where officers are doing their duty to keep us safe, where they're operating in line with their training and with the law, they also have our strong support, and that we make sure that that confidence works both ways, that we have confidence in policing and police have confidence to be able to do that difficult job to keep us safe.
Not here for the absolute beginning, but she made it just in time for the opening statement, so I will call her Nessel Callis-Can.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful for calling me. Building trust and confidence in the police requires time and honest reflection about the challenges, alongside, of course, meaningful steps to improve things. And often when there are high-profile incidents, there is a knee-jerk reaction that happens and a national debate is sparked. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that we must avoid those knee-jerk reactions, that there needs to be a long-term commitment to building trust and confidence, and that also that trust and confidence is built through not just effective policing for serious violent crime, but also so-called low-level crimes like antisocial behaviour and theft, for instance?
I do agree with my honourable friend that some of the issues around confidence are actually about the responsiveness of police and having the neighbourhood policing, that local response, but also that she's also right that we need to respond to things like the major reviews, like the Casey review, like the Angelini review, who also found failings around standards, around systems, around vetting, for example, to make sure that everything we do is responding to those broader reviews as well as recognising difficult individual incidents to boost confidence.
Well, that's the end of that statement. I'll allow the benches to swap over. Order, Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker.
My constituency of Richmond Park, being both particularly attractive and within easy reach of Westminster, is a popular spot for visits by honourable and right honourable members of both sides of this House. And in fact, it's so popular with the right honourable member for Newark. He has visited twice in the last week. And I would seek your guidance, Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Conservative Party leadership contest reaches its exciting final stages, that those of us who are lucky enough to pay host to some of its hustings in our constituencies, should we still expect prior notification of the candidates' plans to visit?
The honourable member for giving notice of her point of order, and can I check that she has actually notified the honourable member for Newark that she intended to raise the matter in the chamber? I can see her nodding. As Mr Speaker has repeatedly told the House, when a member intends to visit another constituency, other than a purely private capacity, they must make every reasonable effort to inform the member representing that constituency before they do so. That applies whatever the purpose of the visit, and I hope that all honourable members will observe this important courtesy.
Did the hustings in a constituency?
Presentation of bills, Layla Moran.
Rough Sleeping Decriminalisation Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 11th of July.
Friday the 11th of July.
Non-Disclosure Agreements Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 11th of July.
Friday the 11th of July.
Palestine Statehood Recognition Number 3 Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 11th of July.
Friday the 11th of July. Motion number 1 on business of the House, Minister to move.
Move formally.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. 7 o'clock. Motion. No. 11. Motion number 2 on payment scheme. I call the Minister to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that the committee consider the Infected Blood Compensation Scheme Regulations 2024. And let us start by reminding ourselves why we are here today. The infected blood scandal is a mark of shame on the British state. The Infected Blood Inquiry's final report, published on the 20th of May, shed light on the trauma inflicted on thousands of people across the country through no fault of their own. People were given contaminated blood or blood products and contracted HIV, hepatitis C and hepatitis B, and then for years had their voices ignored. Those who were affected, the people who loved and knew and cared for someone who was infected, similarly had their voices ignored too. This did nothing but compound the trauma of all involved. The Infected Blood Inquiry's second interim report, published in 2023, set out 18 recommendations on compensation, informed by Sir Robert Francis KC's 2022 Compensation Scheme study. The inquiry was unequivocal that a compensation scheme must be set up immediately. And the regulations that we are debating today are essential for delivering that compensation scheme and getting money to people as quickly as we can. When the now Prime Minister and I responded to Sir Brian Langstaff's inquiry in May, we were absolutely clear that one of the most powerful conclusions in his report is that an apology is meaningful only if it is accompanied by action. Today, with these regulations and this compensation scheme, we are delivering that action and taking another step on the road to justice that has been so cruelly delayed. I will give way.
Thank you, I very much appreciate that. My constituent, Alex Robinson, lost her father to this scandal in 2006, having been his carer since the age of 13. In her own words, he never got to walk me down the aisle or hold his grandchildren. She's incredibly concerned about getting justice. Can the Minister confirm that she will, along with all other families, receive legal support to ensure they can make their application to the compensation scheme successfully?
Well, I'm very grateful for that intervention, and I'm sure that the whole House would join me in expressing their sympathies with the situation that his constituent and their family has been through. Now, the Infected Blood Compensation Authority will aim to ensure that appropriate advice and support is available to assist people with managing their compensation awards, accessing financial services, and also accessing benefits advice where relevant to. One moment. Sir Robert Francis KC recommended in his report that legal support is available to people who want to claim compensation. The government and I have accepted that recommendation, and we will work with the Infected Blood Compensation Authority to develop that package of support services. And I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank you, Minister, for giving way. One of the recommendations in the report was that charities and support organisations that provide advice to victims and their families should be placed on a statutory funding basis. Can the Minister confirm that it is the Government's intention to implement this recommendation?
Hear, hear.
With regard to, if I understand the honourable gentleman's intervention correctly, what he's talking about are the different organisations that already exist. Now, of course, we will consider all the different recommendations in the round, but he is absolutely right to highlight their role because it is hugely important. And I know that the Infected Blood Compensation Authority will look to work with those different support organisations, which I think is absolutely vital. Now, the scheme is based on the recommendations and principles put forward by the inquiry. In line with these, Madam Deputy Speaker, and supported by the advice from the inquiry response expert group, it was then updated following the engagement exercise Sir Robert Francis KC undertook in June with victims and indeed representatives of the infected blood community. And the government has sought to design a fair and comprehensive compensation scheme, but one that is also quick and simple for eligible applicants to access. Now, we'll first turn to eligibility. The scheme and these regulations define people who are eligible as infected people in line with recommendation 2 of the inquiry's second interim report. This covers people infected with HIV, hepatitis C and hepatitis B, and it includes people directly infected by treatment with blood, as well as people indirectly affected via transmission from a directly infected person. Secondly, the regulations establish a core route for claiming compensation as an infected person. The core route provides compensation under 5 awards or categories or heads of loss, as set out in recommendation 6 of the inquiry's report. And these are an injury impact award, a social impact award, a care award, a financial loss award, and an autonomy award. Together, these will comprise the total compensation award to be given to infected individuals or to the estates of any deceased infected individuals to recognise the wide-ranging harm resulting from their infection. Now, earlier this year, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Victims and Prisoners Act established the Infected Blood Compensation Authority in law to deliver the scheme. And I'm proud to have campaigned with many members from across this House to have delivered that change in legislation. And I do pay tribute as well to the Right Honourable Gentleman for Salisbury for his role. And I'm proud that this government is now delivering on that commitment. With these regulations, we are providing the authority with the legal powers they need to start making payments. The regulations also provide further detail on how the Infected Blood Compensation Authority will accept applications and pay awards. Now, I know that the authority under Sir Robert Francis' chairmanship has been working hard to design and implement effective, simple and secure processes that put the infected blood community at the heart of their work. Last week, the Infected Blood Compensation Authority reached out to the very first claimants under the scheme. The authority is taking a test and learn approach which will ensure they can take on board feedback and improve the service before it opens its full compensation scheme. Now, I hope that step provides confidence that we are absolutely committed to driving forward progress to meet our shared intention of beginning payment by the end of this year, which I've previously said to the House. And I will do everything in my power to ensure that all those who are entitled to compensation receive it as soon as possible. Now, I will reflect from, I will give way to the Right Honourable Gentleman.
I'm grateful to the Minister, and may I commend the way in which he's handling this obviously very sensitive matter. He's got the tone just right. On behalf of a constituent, Mr. A, who was infected by being born of a mother who was infected, I've corresponded with Sir Robert Francis KC on my constituent's behalf. If he were here, he'd be keen to know that the compensation scheme will cover people in his circumstances, both for their physical and mental distress. For the avoidance of doubt, could the Minister just confirm that those people will be covered by the scheme as well, please?
Yes, and first of all, let me just, I'm sure I speak for everyone in the House, express my sympathies to his constituent and indeed their family. And he's entirely right to raise that case directly with Sir Robert Francis. I know members, I would say to members across the House actually, to look up the details of the Infected Blood Compensation Authority on the gov.uk website. The details indeed are there, and when they are dealing with constituents, both to point them in that direction, the authority is already setting out newsletters, but also to do as the Right Honourable Gentleman has done and to write directly to the authority. But clearly, on the basis of someone infected where it's been transmitted from his mother, he clearly fits under the category of an infected person under the scheme, and he is precisely the kind of person the scheme is designed to help, and he's right to come and raise that case on the floor of this House today and in this debate. I'll give way to...
Very grateful to the Minister for giving way. This has been a long, long journey for the people who've been affected by this scandal, and that's exactly what it has been. Can you just clarify the issue that has been raised around inheritance tax, given that many of these payments will be paid to possibly very elderly payments, and the kind of second generation recipients are worried about the issue of inheritance tax? Will this be exempt from that, and is that possible?
Yes, the awards are exempt from tax. I think it's inheritance tax and indeed capital gains tax, and that's precisely how the scheme has been designed. I hope that gives a reassurance to the Honourable Gentleman. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will move to the points that were raised by the Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee, because it is important I do address those. Now, as the committee noted, the infected blood scandal stretches back over many decades, and access to records, particularly medical evidence, is going to be very challenging, and I acknowledge that. And that is at the very heart of the challenge, frankly, as I'm sure Honourable and Right Honourable members will understand, of trying to address an injustice that's been allowed to continue for so many decades. Now, where it is the case, the authority will need to make objective decisions relying on evidence that is available to determine on the balance of probabilities that treatment with infected blood occurred. The authority will, and I expect it to, provide assistance to those who believe their medical records have been lost or destroyed, and evidencing eligibility will be easier, faster and more compassionate than, for example, one would experience through any court proceedings. Now, the committee also highlighted the complexity of the regulations. That is why, alongside the publication of the regulations and the explanatory memorandum, the government published a detailed policy paper in August on how the compensation scheme will operate, setting out what individuals can expect to receive, including case study examples. Additionally, the Infected Blood Compensation Authority will ensure that appropriate advice and support is available to assist people in managing their compensation awards, accessing financial services and indeed accessing benefits advice where relevant, as I set out in the earlier intervention to my honourable friend. Thirdly, the committee raised questions on how claimants will receive payments. Now, as set out in recommendation 10 of the Infected Blood Inquiry's second interim report, the regulations include a mechanism for electing for periodic compensation payments or a lump sum, and that's responding, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the wishes of those who've told us that they wanted this option to be available to them. We've also provided an alternative for those currently receiving support scheme payments through the infected blood support schemes. The so-called IBSS route was developed following the recommendations of Sir Robert Francis KC, following his engagement with representatives of the infected blood community. Now, the clearest finding from that engagement, as I say, was around the continuation of the existing support scheme payments. The government has listened, and we have agreed and accepted that support scheme payments will continue for life for those who elect the IBSS route. And the route will be available for those who applied to be registered on a support scheme on or before the 31st of March 2025 and delivered as part of the compensation package. Now, the tariff-based scheme, and this tariff-based scheme, is designed to be fast, fair, consistent and secure. And we hope people will be satisfied. They've been provided with full and fair compensation as the scheme sets out. One moment. However, should that not be the case, the regulations do make provision concerning review of decisions made by the authority and for appeals to the first tier tribunal. And I give way to my honourable friend.
Friend for giving way. Michael in my Runcorn and Helsby constituency will benefit from this action, this compensation. I do commend the Minister and the Government for the swift action here. How do we ensure that maintain trust in terms of the process? Is there an opportunity for victims to review any aspects of the compensation scheme that may not be working in the future?
Yes, and my honourable friend makes a very powerful point about trust in the process going forward. The way the scheme is designed, there is a core route, there is also then a supplemental route that is designed where there are particular issues, for example, around care claims or around financial loss that are not appropriately captured in the core route. But there's also, as I've said, provision around review and indeed appeals to the first tier tribunal, and that is important. But I would also say to my honourable friend that one of the purposes of having a tariff-based scheme is also to try and make it simpler, easier to access, so that the number of subsequent appeals and the need for such appeals is minimised. Now, I know that the House speaks as one when it comes to paying long overdue compensation to those impacted by this harrowing scandal. And following the passing of the Victims and Prisoners Act, these regulations are the next substantial step towards getting money to people who rightly deserve it. But I also recognise that whilst there has been progress, this work is far from finished. A second set of regulations will provide for other elements of the compensation scheme, including compensation payments to those who are affected and for claims outside that core route. Now, subject of course to parliamentary approval, I am aiming, and the government is aiming, for the second set of regulations to be in place by the 31st of March 2025 to support our intention and what I've previously said to this House, so that those who are affected can start receiving payments next year. Now, I know, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there is a shared determination across this House to deliver compensation as swiftly as possible and with the minimum possible delay. And I hope that today, Madam Deputy Speaker, honourable members can agree across the House that these regulations are a significant step towards that.
As on the order paper, I call the Shadow Minister, Mr John Glenn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to start by thanking the Paymaster General for advance notice of the statutory instrument being laid, which he has always done. The Paymaster General rightly reminds the House of the injustice that the victims of the infected blood scandal have been subject to, an injustice that has spanned several decades. But I hope that we are now in rapid delivery mode, and my role is to ensure that the government is doing all it can to deliver compensation as swiftly and effectively as possible for the infected and affected, following the passage of the bill through the House under the previous government. As the Right Honourable Gentleman knows, it is also my duty to work collaboratively with the government on this matter in supporting them and scrutinising them where appropriate. And to that end, I wish to set out some issues raised with me by representatives of the infected and affected communities. But firstly, may I draw his attention again to the second report of the session of the Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee, which found the explanatory memorandum to be overly complex and technical while lacking basic information about the policy. Now, to some extent, Madam Deputy Speaker, I very much sympathise. This is a very complicated matter, and I suspect the Right Honourable Gentleman will agree with me that this critical information should be easily accessible to all. So can the Paymaster General assure the House that he will do everything he can to ensure that the next explanatory memorandum to the second set of regulations will be much clearer in language and in outlining how the policy will work practically? He rightly referred to the detailed policy paper that he published in August with the case studies and the reference to advice and support. But I think the implications of what's been said is that there is an improvement that can be made. On the Infected Blood Compensation Authority, I echo my previous comments in welcoming the government's pledge to deliver the first payments by the end of the year. And I know the Paymaster General and I align in recognising the paramount importance in delivering this compensation as quickly as possible. However, currently, there is no defined timetable on when applications can be made from and when payments will be processed. Furthermore, I know the Paymaster General will find it equally troubling as I do that groups of victims have previously described meeting this end-of-year deadline as nigh on impossible. And trust issues are obviously ones that we need to build up and achieve. Can the Paymaster General outline the steps the government and the IBCA are taking to ensure that payments will be made by the end of the year, just 10 weeks away? And can he confirm what proportion of the eligible infected community will receive their payments by the end of the year? I'm sensing that there is a suspicion that I'm sure the Paymaster General will be aware that achieving payouts for the previously mentioned user group of 20 individuals by the end of the year will be used to technically satisfy the obligation he made to get money out of the door by the end of the year. But what the infected community as a whole will want to know is that all of them, beyond the 20, will receive their payments in their bank accounts and what interval between the end of the year and that happening is. Please can the Paymaster General explain how the user group of 20 people have found the new scheme and how quickly can their lessons be applied to the rest of the infected community? Now, I understand, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the IBCA recently confirmed their intention to invite increasingly larger groups of people to test the service before it opens to those who are eligible. So can the Paymaster General confirm when the scheme will be open to larger groups, how many will be involved? Will this include all victims, including those affected from the infected estates? Now, the Right Honourable Gentleman mentioned the issues around burden of proof, and I would also wish to seek clarification on the proof that victims need to provide. It appears that the burden of proof once again falls to victims, and this risks going against the letter and spirit of both Sir Brian Langstaff and Sir Robert Francis's recommendations. Now, I recognise and am sympathetic to the challenges given the Cabinet Office official's advice to me when I was in his position that locating medical records could be an issue given that the latest case date specified in the regulations is more than 30 years ago. So can the Paymaster General outline the decision-making process of the IBCA in circumstances where those medical records are apparently unavailable, and what steps he is taking to ensure that rightful compensation is received when proof of infected conditions is not readily available? Now, I want to move on, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I may, to affected persons. In his report in May, Sir Brian Langstaff made abundantly clear that both infected and affected persons were to be given interim payments as quickly as possible. I'm therefore concerned that Part 3 of this instrument defines eligible infected blood persons, but not the affected persons. Can the Minister offer some reassurance to the affected communities and confirm that he has not ignored Sir Brian Langstaff's recommendation for the affected community? They are concerned that the government's delays in laying the second set of regulations for them means that many elderly parents of infected victims or bereaved partners will not live to see their rightful payouts as affected individuals. And whilst I recognise and acknowledge the drafting and timetable challenges, it will be 10 months from the final report in May this year to the end of March next year without any defined regulations or timetable for making a claim as an affected person. And this will distress many in the affected community. Now, I'm absolutely sure that the Right Honourable Gentleman does not think it is fair for these affected people to feel like second-class citizens, but can he explain what processes will be underway between now and the end of March? And can he look to publish even a broad outline, a timetable for affected communities' applications and their interval before payments will be received? I'm also concerned that there isn't an impact assessment of this SI, and I think parliamentary scrutiny from all sides needs to be balanced, and fairer legislation will ensue if we could have a maximum impact assessment in advance so that evaluation process can be better informed. I know the Minister has previously said the costs of the infected blood scheme will be recognised in the budget next week. Can he confirm whether the government has calculated the impact and cost of the regulations? And I'd like to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, by thanking the Right Honourable Gentleman for his work in this area and his transparency with me. This is very technically challenging and difficult to get right. I have enormous sympathy for him and respect for him. However, I urge him to ensure that critical information is as readily accessible as possible to all victims, infected and affected alike. Bring as much specificity as possible to the timelines for those different communities to this House as quickly as possible, and outline the cost of the scheme. For many of these victims, time is of the essence, which is why we must do all we can to deliver justice as quickly and effectively as possible. I remain committed to supporting the government where I possibly can and asking as reasonable questions as I can where answers still need to be provided. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Jessica Morden.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm really pleased to see these regulations return to the House today, and although there's still much to do, it does mark a significant milestone in ensuring that the government delivers on its promise to work apace to establish the Infected Blood Compensation Authority and to give it the necessary powers to start making the compensation payments. And as other honourable members have said, we do need to do this to ensure that the payments are made as quickly as possible for people who have waited far, far too long for justice already. So I very much also thank the Minister for the urgency with which he has worked to progress this issue to date since coming into government, and I know he will have done so with the many stories of injustice from this long-running scandal in his mind. And he'll know, as my constituency neighbour, that my constituents, the Smiths, lost their son Colin to AIDS, aged just 7 years old. Colin contracted it from infected blood from Arkansas prison, aged just 10 months old, and it emerged during the inquiry that Colin's doctor knew about the infection risks associated with giving the blood treatments to children, but he broke his own NHS department's guidelines to do so anyway. And not only did they lose their very beloved son, but because of the stigma surrounding HIV at the time, the family were ostracised by the local community, harassed, abused, lost employment, and even had AIDS dead written in black paint alongside their house. And that's why we're here today, and that there are so many stories, and that is just why it is so important. When the final report of the infected blood inquiry was published, I said to the now former minister that the Smiths wanted Colin to be remembered and for sorry to turn into something, into concrete action on compensation without adding further to the decades of painful delay which so many victims have had to endure. So